call this special council meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
Your Worship, all members of council are present this evening, with the exception of Councillor Zanko.
Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Yeah, Councillor McDermott. With respect to the one item, with respect to the YMCA?
The YMCA works for the what?
Any other disclosures? Councillor Butler, you have a resolution to go into closed session?
I do. Thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Dubanow, that council does now go into closed session at 5:02 p.m. to discuss the following. Pursuant to Section 2392C of the Municipal Act 2001, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality of local board re YMCA of Niagara Fort Erie location. B, pursuant to Section 2392E of the Municipal Act 2001, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. 3, Favreau Property -960 Garrison Road.
And if we're unable to transact our business during the next hour, we'll be breaking for the council and committee meeting, and then we'll be coming back afterwards. Any questions or comments with respect to the motion? All those in favor? That is carried. If you have the resolution for us to rise out of closed session and into closed session?
Yes, I do, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko, that council does now rise and reconvene closed session at 5:57 p.m. with respect to the following items. A, YMCA of Niagara Fort location. Staff will proceed as directed, and Favreau Property.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. May I have my book back, please? Yes. Yeah. I'll give it. Hey, Councillor Lubberts, you have the next resolution, and that's the confirmatory bylaw for the closed session meeting. Number 3, resolution number 3.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Butler. That bylaw number 153-2019 to confirm the actions of council at a special closed session meeting held on December 2nd, 2019 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor McDermott, you have the next resolution, resolution number 4.
Thank you, Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Butler, that bylaw number 153, 2019 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and clerk under the corporate law.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. And Councillor Butler, motion to adjourn.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself and seconded by Councillor McDermott. The council adjourns at 5:59 p.m. to reconvene into a regular meeting of council on December 9th, 2019.
All those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. So momentarily, we're going to start the council and committee meeting. And it's now 6 o'clock, so I'm going to call this council and committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
Your Worship, all members of council are present this evening.
Thank you. We begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Mississaugas of the New Credit and the Anishinaabe people. There are no announcements this evening. There is an addendum. We have 2 additional presentations and delegations under Planning and Development Services. One is Jeff McIntyre with respect to the effects of marijuana grow-op operations in rural residential areas. And the second is Victor Muratori with respect to the extension of a plan of subdivision, Alliston Woods. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm declaring a conflict of interest with PDS 72-2019. Understanding that this report deals primarily with cannabis growing on residential lands, there is mention of production facilities, and therefore I will declare a conflict of interest since I am an investor in a potential cannabis production facility located on agricultural land within the boundaries of the municipality of Fort Erie.
Are there any others? That takes us then to notices of upcoming public meetings. These all relate to the budget schedule. We have another budget meeting on Wednesday, December the 4th, with respect to water and wastewater, operating budget and user fees analysis. On Wednesday, January the 22nd, 2020, we'll be dealing with our general levy operating budget and assessment analysis. If necessary, we will have an additional meeting on January 29th, 2020. The anticipated bylaw passage dates are for the budget, preliminary budget, December the 9th. That will deal with capital matters. January the 20th, water and wastewater budget and rates. And February the 10th, 2020, the general levy budget and general capital budget. All the meetings take place in the council chambers at 6 o'clock. Those are all Wednesday evenings. There are no public meetings scheduled this evening. There is a consent agenda. I have a mover for the items in the consent agenda, Councillor Dubanow. Are there any questions with respect to any of the items contained in the consent agenda? Councillor Noyes. Well, that's an interesting question, Councillor Noyes, and I had a question myself on that. But Mr. Walsh, you've been dealing with NRBN, and we've had some long discussions about this particular issue.
My apologies, Mayor. Councillor, your microphone wasn't working. We couldn't hear you.
Button on? Yeah, so Councillor Noyes was interested in knowing what it is that NRBN may be contemplating in Fort Erie in the context of comments made in the Land Committee minutes.
Through you, Mayor, that's a very good question. They won't tell us. Short answer.
So, Councillor Noyes, do you have any other questions on this? So where we go from here, and Mr. Walsh can correct me if I'm wrong, there's negotiations have taken place between NRBN and the town of Fort Erie with respect to their use of public road allowances, which they have an obligation to enter into with us, because they're not a recognized provincial utility like some of the larger ones like Bell or Cogeco. So we charge $400 per plan that we approve. So if they present a plan, they want to do some work someplace, we charge $400. They didn't really want to pay that, so we proposed to them, and Mr. Walsh can kick in after this, we proposed to them that they wouldn't have to pay. We would waive the fee if they decided to install fiber optics in unserviced areas. And I thought that was what they wanted, but it looks like the town was asking for something further. Is that correct, Mr. Walsh?
To the extent that our offer was the waiving of fees for unserviced high-speed areas is correct. We haven't asked for anything more. They came back after that and said it's too hard to differentiate between serviced and unserviced areas, so we'll just pay the $400 fee per application.
And they can't, and they haven't provided any business plan for Fort Erie because they haven't developed one, is that correct?
Whether they have or have not developed one, I do not know. I do know they have not provided a plan to us.
Right, and I'm advised they don't have one. Yes, please proceed. Speak louder then.
Working day.
Mr. Walsh, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, the report speaks to monitoring detouring routes such that they're suitable for the amount of traffic expected.
Right. Yes, of course. We want to make sure we can hear you, Councillor Noyes. Did you have any further questions? No. Any other questions for the consent agenda items? Mr. Walsh, I just was wondering if I could get some clarity with respect to the report IS 45, which deals with the enhanced bridge and culvert inspections. The recommendation is for an amount of $60,491. I don't see that any place in the tables that are provided here on pages 2 and 3 of the report. Sorry, 3 and 4 of the report. So as an example, on page 3, there's a table, 1, which shows the estimated cost, but is the 60,000 rolled into one of those other costs, or does it make up a number of them added together?
I think the latter, sorry, Mayor, the latter is correct. It's rolled up into the costs. If you add their original proposal, plus the enhanced inspection, plus the dewatering required, you get to an amount of $143,000. And our approved budget in the 2019 operating was $100,000, and that's the request for 43. But back to your original point, the 60,400 is rolled in there
All right,
eventually.
thank you. If there aren't any other questions, I'm going to call the question with respect to the consent agenda items. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to corporate and community services. Councillor Dubanow, I'll hand the chair to you.
My microphone.
Speak loud. Speak louder.
Thank you, Worship. Corporate and Community Services is now in session. So we have a presentation tonight by Mr. Adam, the manager of strategic. Much.
Again? Just page down? Thank you.
Thanks, Janine. Mayor and council members and staff and people in the audience, I just want to provide a brief overview of our multi-year accessibility plan, 2019 to 2023. So I'm going to... So the town has met all of its obligations under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. We do have one outstanding item that's due in 2021 related to web accessibility. So every 5 years, the municipality, because of our size, has to come to council and put in place a long-term plan. Every year I do an annual accessibility overview for you. And so our last plan ended in 2018. So in 2019, I've come to you tonight with the 5-year plan to 2023. What we've done is, similar to other years, is we provide our accomplishments over the last year. And so you'll see in the report that is before council tonight, a breakdown of the accomplishments by commitment of funding by council, the review of site plans, commenting on legislation, removal of barriers, and representation and interaction with other organizations throughout the community. And so what happened is with making sure that we met all the compliance requirements, the municipalities, AAC, Accessibility Advisory Committee said, well, what's next? We've met all the compliance requirements. We can meet every month and just kind of talk about things, but let's go out to the community and see what they think. So what we did was we started a public consultation campaign. We went to Ridgefest. There's a picture of us. We went on a rainy day. We had some really good conversations, even due to the weather. And then we went and undertook an online survey. So we went from August 19th to September 22nd. We did some social media advertising as well as in the local paper. We had hard copies available here in the town hall. We did a nice little banner that's kind of in behind Gary and Faith there, 2 of our AAC members. And so what we asked, it was very simple. We just said, you know, are there any barriers to municipal services that are still out there that maybe we don't know about or aren't aware of? And then we asked if there are other barriers in the community that they would like to see addressed and how that affected their family and themselves. And then just what does an accessible community look like? So what we heard, and I provided all the feedback as part of the multi-year accessibility plan, because what the AAC will do now moving forward is we're going to look at each one of those comments and say, can we address that? Is that something we can work with another community organization or business to try to meet those accessibility requirements? So what we heard about municipal services mainly related to sidewalk snow removal and the lack of parking, especially in the downtown cores. So you'll see in some of the recommendations in the plan, working with our traffic coordinating committee and infrastructure services to address some of those issues. The barriers in the community were mainly related to commercial buildings, churches, restaurants not being accessible. So even having a ramp or a handrail put in most locations or an accessible washroom. So you'll see as some of our accomplishments that are contained in the report how well we have worked with different commercial enterprises like Walmart. If you've noticed all the accessible spaces there now, that was part of our committee saying, you know, we're hearing from the community that we don't have enough accessible spaces. So they went from like 8 spaces to 16. So working with our committee and actually with planning to open up a site plan agreement again and paying that fee was just a real win for our committee as well, because they didn't have to do it. They chose to do it and to provide more access to their patrons. So one other thing that we did hear about too was awareness about services. So even though it's maybe not a town service, what's out there for people, veterans and persons with disabilities. When we were at Ridgefest, we actually met with a veteran and his wife, and they had just recently moved into an apartment and said, you know, what's out there? We don't know. We can't access services. We don't know where to go. And so we provided them with information, and Faith, one of our members, followed up with them personally, and they said what a difference that made because they actually got the answers that they were looking for. So little wins like that really makes a difference for our committee members as well. They take great pride in what they do and our accomplishments. Lack of accessible parking as well for commercial buildings and restaurants and churches as well. And the need for affordable housing was really heard loud and clear, and I know that council has been very supportive of trying to find some answers. That was very important to hear as well, because it just is another acknowledgement that we do need that in our community. And just what does an accessible community look like to you? So barrier-free, where we can all participate, and accessibility is considered a right and not a privilege or inconvenience. So that was some of the comments we heard. So the recommendations, and this is my second from last slide, that are contained in the report are that we just continue to meet our obligations under the AODA. So that's making sure we have accessible documents and that we provide service, accessible customer service to meet the needs of the person that's asking for the service. That we proactively inspect, maintain, and clear sidewalks and curb cuts to ensure a smooth path of travel for all residents. That we, based on the feedback that we heard, that we work with the Traffic Coordinating Committee to review on-street parking and municipal parking lots and create new accessible parking spaces closer to buildings where we determine that need. We actually have had Chris Miller, the neighborhood planner, also come to our committee and talk to us about the Crystal Beach parking strategy. So we have had input. The fourth recommendation there, sometimes we forget about the AODA requirements or we don't think about accessibility. So making sure that our staff are also aware. I'm recommending that we put under financial and staffing considerations, AODA consideration as well. Just that extra little check for staff to think about it when they're writing reports. That we're consulted on all applicable master plans, neighborhood plans, and major projects to ensure no new barriers are created. Our staff are very good at that. Rick's staff in planning are great. Signe comes to our committee a lot with the waterfront strategies and the parks and open space strategies. And the AAC continues to work with businesses and organizations to improve access and create a more inclusive experience. And the last one, just that Town Council acknowledges the work being done to create a more inclusive community on an annual basis, and that could be during National Access Awareness Week in late spring or on December 3rd, which is International Persons with Disabilities Day. So just in closing, this is just a slide from International Day for Persons with Disabilities website. And it just talks about the future and making sure that the future is accessible for everyone. So on that, I will just close. And it is December 3rd is International Persons with Disabilities Day as well. So just to acknowledge that. Okay. Yep.
Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Noyes.
Let's hope it works. Thank you for your presentation and your constant work for the Accessibility Committee. You've been wonderful on it. And I know it's recent. There's been a recent success that we've just had in regards to how the concern was brought up to our committee and how we addressed it and the results of that. I think you know which one I'm talking about.
Which one? There's been lots.
The one where we wrote a letter to the corporate services where a gentleman was not being treated as we felt fair.
Oh, yes. So the Dollarama one you're talking about?
I didn't want to mention a name.
Oh, no, it's fair enough. It'll be in our minutes. So we had two members that had an experience with Dollarama, both in Niagara Falls and in Fort Erie. One to do with the accessible doors weren't working, and another one, he's blind, legally blind, but on the very bottom of their receipts, it says no refunds. So he didn't know. He went in for a brush, came out, and his mother, who was driving him, said, "That's not the right one. Go back in, get a refund." And they denied him 3 times. We also had a community member say that they had an issue with the carts and stuff, that with the stick, that people that are seniors or persons with disabilities, maybe would need extra help. So I actually had a call from their head office last Friday, and they did confirm in writing with me, thanking us for bringing that to their attention. They met with their HR and their regional district. The doors are now fixed. The carts will still remain, not being able to be taken out of the store, but their staff will be retrained on making sure that they provide that assistance for elderly persons or persons with disabilities. They also offered to give the individual a gift card, but I said that wasn't necessary, just as long as their corporate culture. You can have all the accessibility policies and all the written documents in the world, but if you're not living that corporate culture, that's where the impact is. So they really appreciated that we brought that to their attention. And again, it was just a simple letter. We have a way, as you say, Councillor Noyes, of writing letters that are with the carrot, not the stick, right? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments from council? All right, received none. So thank you very much, Ms. Prado. So we have no other presentations or delegations. So that brings us to report CAO-33-2019, Town of Fort Erie 2019 to 2023 multi-year accessibility plan. That's moved by Councillor Zanko. Any questions, comments from council? Your worship.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on how fortunate the town of Fort Erie is to have so many dedicated people working on accessibility issues in our community, and how cooperative most of the businesses have been in their efforts. So I do know that we will continue to support accessibility initiatives, removal of barriers, and I'm just surprised that we weren't aware that December the 3rd was a day that we could have declared as a special day as well. So perhaps in the future, we can get the heads up on that.
Councillor Noyes.
Dubanow. Just wanted to continue with that comment from the mayor, is that the achievements of our accessibility committee is that we've been very fortunate to be able to get organizations, various ones, to do things they don't even have to do, that they're exempt from, they're grandfathered in and they don't have to do it. But when we approach them the right way and we give them an alternative, we have members from the accessibility committee that'll actually go to their site, give them suggestions, and say it's good for everyone. And we've had a lot of success over the years when people are putting money into their buildings to make it good for all of us.
Community Services is now finished for the evening, and I'll hand the chair back to his worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dubanow. That takes us to Planning and Development Services, Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Planning and Development Services is now in session. That brings us to our first presentation and delegation. Lisa Price, Project Manager, LCA Environmental, and Ann McDonald, Project Coordinator, LCA Environmental, regarding industrial land, EC areas, report number PDS 70, 2019.
We're going to take you through a brief presentation, as brief as we can make it, with regards to the work that we've been completing over the last couple of years to update the industrial lands area with regards to the EC environmental conservation designated areas. So the purpose of the study was to go through all of the existing information and complete current evaluations, field-based evaluations, so that we could determine the accuracy of the existing mapping and update it as needed. The study itself was done over 2 years to ensure that we could comply with all of the required timelines for the various inventories that we did. So we went and we inventoried and did the assessments of all the natural areas within the Fort Erie Industrial District. We intend to provide the town then with the guidance so that they can look at the development potential within the industrial lands and provide them with up-to-date mapping. So approximately 618 hectares in size is the general size of the Fort Erie Industrial District, and of that, about 170 hectares of land were identified as environmental conservation lands. Now, environmental conservation lands are somewhat unique because, according to most of the regional and provincial policies, they don't always prohibit development, but they do require additional studies to be done. And in the case of Fort Erie, studies that were done back in 2003 by Dugan and Associates was the basis of the existing mapping that was done. So that now would be 15, 16 years old in terms of it. So we were tasked with looking at the natural areas and determine whether the features and functions remained and whether there were areas that needed to be upgraded to further higher levels of protection, or whether there were areas that could be removed from the EC designation and allow some development potential to occur on those lands. The study area is quite broad. It's outlined by the white dash that you see there, extending up towards Bowen Road, down south by Garrison and Helena, and then there was a small piece up in the corner that you'll notice on the far right side of the slide that encompasses the Stevensville Road area, including Eagle Street. So in order to understand the land base a little bit and to address some of the natural features, because many of these features are what we would consider larger contiguous features that cover multiple parcels of land and multiple landowners. So the area was divided into 6 different sub-areas for classification purposes and for ease of actually conducting some of the field studies. Now, at the onset of this project, because it was approved early in the spring months, by the time we got the approval and then we reached out to the landowners, some of the responses, we had to give an adequate period of time for them to respond. We missed some of the spring window, which is why some of the work went into 2019 as well, so that we could cover off spring. So there were 69 properties in total identified within the study area. 5 of them regionally owned, 4 municipally owned, and 60 are privately owned. And of all of those different owned properties, there were 57 different landowners that required communication in order for us to gain access to the properties. We did not go onto any properties unless we were provided with written access or consent from the landowners. Originally, we sent them a letter asking them, outlining the details of the study, asking for permission to access. We received 43 different responses, so we were granted permission to 38 properties. 5 properties were denied, and 26 properties, they gave us no response at all. So in the absence of a response, obviously, we did not access those lands. So in summary, we had about 55% access to the properties, totaling about almost 60% of the land area. For the different areas. The areas were then further identified by number, just so that we could talk about various parcels of land. For small parcels, like those on Gilmore Road, where it was a lot of individual landowners backing onto one feature, the individuals it was put into a block as opposed to having 5 or 6 individual sort of laneways. But again, this was more just for our analysis purposes and so that we could commonly talk about different properties. The public consultation process included an open house that was held on May 9th in 2018 for any of the interested landowners. So again, notice went out to the landowners, all landowners, not just those that responded, to see if there were any questions or concerns. We reached out to the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority as well as the region of Niagara at the onset of the study. MPCA deferred to the region in terms of providing feedback if there were any additional studies that needed to be done. And we did get the feedback from the region in September of 2018. They did ask for a few additional studies, so those were also incorporated through the winter surveys and again into the spring surveys. Just some additional things that they wanted looked at in terms of bird surveys and things of that nature. So Anne's going to speak a little bit to some of the survey work results.
Briefly as I can. So starting with the ecological land classification. So vegetation communities were assessed for each of the properties to which we had access. So we ended up assessing a total of 54 different polygons. Of the ones that we were able to evaluate, we went down to the vegetation type level, but up here I've got the community class just to give you a broad sort of sense of what the landscape looks like. So the majority of the areas we looked at were thicket and meadow habitat, and of those, most of them were also cultural communities, which are those which historically have a great deal of human disturbance to them. And then the others were split between the swamp, woodland, forest, and marsh habitat. And then if you looked at the overall study area that we were looking at, 17% of that area is already developed. For the botanical surveys, we did, again, for the properties that we had access to, we did spring, summer, and fall floral surveys. We ended up identifying a total of 220 different species, and we've broken down sort of how many were found in each area there. Of those 220 species, one of them was identified as a species at risk, which was the provincially threatened dense blazing star. And then there were 4 provincially rare species as well throughout the area. So for avian monitoring, we had 10 different survey dates where we completed the breeding bird surveys between 2018 and 2019, identified 69 different species, and 4 of those species were at risk, so 2 special concern and 2 threatened species. For amphibian and reptile monitoring, we completed and urine call surveys according to Marsh Monitoring Program protocol in both 2018 and 2019. In 2018, we only had roadside surveys because that timing window for those surveys to get started was prior to us having access to any properties, so we wanted to make sure we didn't miss that window. But then in 2019, after gaining more access, we added 3 additional site-specific survey stations, and completed surveys there as well. So through those surveys, we found a total of 6 amphibians. And then in addition to those, we had ongoing visual encounter surveys. So every time we were at a site, walking through a property, we would be doing hand searches, looking for reptiles, amphibians, lifting logs, things like that. And we also had completed road mortality surveys at the request of the region in the spring of 2019. So in addition to those 6 amphibians, we also found 4 different reptile species, one of which was at risk. We had the snapping turtle, which is special concern. For mammalian monitoring, we completed bat acoustic monitoring in 2018. We installed 20 different monitors, acoustic monitors across the entire study area, and collected data throughout the month of June. We analyzed that data using Sonobat 4 software with their auto ID feature, and then also manually vetted those results. And using the statistical analyses that they provided, we confirmed 4 different species of bats in the study area, none of which were at risk. And in addition to the bats, we were also doing ongoing incidental observations. Again, anytime we were at the property, making notes of tracks or other signs of animals. And at the request of the region, we also completed the winter mammal tracking in the winter of 2019. So 8 additional common terrestrial mammalian species there. For fish habitat, we limited our assessments of the watercourses to those which were within the ECA designated areas or adjacent land that were unclassified. So we identified 5 small watercourses for which we completed rapid assessments and just determined that they were intermittent watercourses providing marginal fish habitat. So those are all mapped and included in the final report as well. For wetlands, so we, through our ecological land classification, through that evaluation, we identified 4 unevaluated wetland pockets in the study area. And so what we did was we assessed those using the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System. And 3 of the wetlands that we identified ended up being complexed in with the existing PSWs that were in the area because of proximity or hydrologic connectivity. And then one of those, which wasn't connected to any other wetlands hydrologically, was not considered significant based on the scoring that we did using the OS system. For species at risk and significant wildlife habitat, we completed a screening for each of those that we submitted to the region as part of the terms of reference. And so through that screening process, we looked at the habitat that is present in the study area and what the requirements are for either significant wildlife habitat or what the habitat requirements are for species at risk, and sort of cross-reference those to see which ones may occur in the area. So we identified 24 types of candidate significant wildlife habitat, and through our surveys we confirmed the presence of 3 of those: turtle nesting habitat, shrub and early successional breeding bird habitat, and then habitat for special concern and rare wildlife. And of the 30 species at risk which had the potential to occur, we had 7 observed, which I spoke to previously. So after that was all completed, we ended up compiling the data by study area and then assessing each natural feature within those sort of 6 sub-areas that we showed earlier. And we assessed them against the criteria that Dugan had identified in the 2003 Natural Areas Inventory, so that we were consistent with the current mapping, municipal mapping in the official plan. So we assessed each of the features using those 7 criteria, but measuring them against the current policies, legislations, guidelines that are out today, so that we could have sort of an up-to-date assessment of those features. And so some of the recommendations that came out of that were we identified areas which are currently designated as EC lands, which we are recommending to upgrade to EPA lands, either because of their contributions to wetlands, significant wildlife habitat or species, or if they were some of those unevaluated wetlands, things like that. And then for EC designation removal, our recommendations for those areas were based on either the current land use. There are some areas which are already developed, but the mapping hasn't been updated to reflect that. Areas where there's a high degree of disturbance and lack of connectivity, or just areas where they didn't meet those three criteria that Dugan had outlined in the 2003 Natural Areas Inventory. So just as a side note too, the areas where we have recommended that the EC designation be removed, a number of those areas still have the regional EC layer or are close enough to the EP lands that they will still trigger that EIS requirement if a development application were to go in. So before we get into the numbers and the recommendations there, I just have a couple slides that show examples of those properties. So the first couple here are areas where we've recommended that EC designation be removed. So again, you can see lack of habitat diversity, high degree of disturbance. Same here, no significant features or functions identified on that land. And then moving into the areas, some examples where we've recommended that we upgrade to EP. So this is an example of an area that was sort of adjacent to wetlands, had a high degree of diversity. And then again, this is an example of one of those wetlands that was previously unevaluated that would be complexed in with an existing wetland. So this is a breakdown of the numbers, so just showing you kind of, we got that overall industrial area, 618 hectares. The existing EP lands and sort of what we've recommended upgrading there, which would bring the updated EP lands to 153 hectares or 25% of the industrial lands. And then the existing EC lands, 170. And then we've added, taken away the ones where that EC designation can be removed or where it needs to be upgraded. And also that EC lands added, that is areas where there previously was no designation, but we've recommended adding it due to the presence of special features which will need to be addressed through the development process, either through mitigation or offsetting. So, and then got a visual representation here. Lisa, take
So
you
this
through.
map really just provides you a summary or a visual depiction of the numbers that were on that previous slide, a little bit easier to see so that you can actually see the areas. Those with the yellow and the crosshatch are the ones that were identified for removal with the EC lands designation. In the case of some of the lands that were upgraded from EC or environmental conservation up to environmental protection, some of those are parts or are contiguous with existing wetland features. And because of the field evaluations we did, we could determine that they too were contributing to the form and function of the wetland, either hydrologically or biologically. So in a lot of cases, those wetland blocks became more squared up and didn't have little weird cutouts in the middle of them that we knew would never be developable. So this again map, it just shows you the depiction of the areas where the EPA designation will remain and those where the EC designation can be removed. As part of the study, we were also tasked with identifying some of the natural corridors. As you're aware, both regionally, provincially, there are other corridor type maps. This map is reflective of the work that we did to identify where we believe are the most logical corridors running through the industrial land areas, just so that it can be contrasted with some of the other mapping that's out there. And in terms of constraints, this map was prepared just so that you could identify areas, especially with people if they're coming or approaching the municipality to buy lands or look at development opportunities. We've put it in the high, moderate, and low constraints. So an area of high constraint typically has EPA on it, and according to both the municipal, the regional, and the provincial policies, EP designated lands typically do not allow or provide for development opportunity. Moderate constraint areas are areas that likely have an EC designation on it or have some form and function on it that would be subject to additional studies prior to being developable. And areas of low constraint are those lands that have very few features on them, perhaps do not trigger any type of additional information, although they may still trigger something on a regional or provincial level. But on a municipal level, they don't trigger any of the municipal requirements. So just in conclusion, as I said, this study was done so that we could update the 2003 NAI mapping that is currently within the official plan and bring it forward in light of existing policies, both at the regional and provincial level, as well as what's happening municipally. Only those sites that we were granted permission to, obviously, were the ones that we accessed, so that we could not make recommendations on lands that we did not have access to, because we could not definitively say whether or not there were species of concern on those properties. So those have not been included, obviously, within the analysis. There were no changes made to any existing provincial or regionally designated areas or their mapping. So there's no loss of PSWs. In most cases, the PSWs grew in size through the additional of the EC lands to PSW. Development applications for the lands with natural heritage designations will still likely require an environmental impact assessment, subject to the regional and provincial policies. So an application that comes forward, even though it may be exempt from anything on the municipal level, could still be triggered at the provincial or the regional level to do additional studies on those lands. And from the study, what we've garnered is that there are about 84 hectares of EC lands that can be redesignated and made available for industrial development. Thank you very much for your time, and if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Price and Ms. McDowell, for your presentation. Are there any questions from council? Mayor Redekop.
Yes, thank you very much for that very in-depth report. It's very quite interesting reading as well. So, not to put too fine a point on this, about 44% of the town's industrial lands really have constraints.
Yes,
A quarter of them have constraints probably beyond removal.
Yes, that's right.
Where we thought we had 170 existing EC lands which had constraints that might be addressed, we're now down to 84 because 32 you've upgraded to environmental protection. 7 we've got, well, I guess we've got some additional lands, and 61 hectares you've removed. So we have a challenge in terms of industrial land. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
If I might, Madam Chair, just, you have a map with respect to the updated natural heritage mapping.
It's back.
It's map 5, I think. Anyways, so,
I'm not sure which one it is.
yeah,
Is
the
it
one that you just had right there.
This one here.
So I'm fascinated by the environmental conservation layer in the middle of the practice horse track, which I think we all understood had been disturbed for usage, number 1, and number 2 has recently been cleared. So you must have found something of interest there that has escaped most mortal eyes.
Yes, there's a species, a plant species that is on those lands. So a portion of it, obviously, is going to trigger additional studies on a provincial level because of the significance attached to it. But there are provisions within the provincial legislation that will allow you, especially in the case of a plant, to go through a debt benefit permit or something of that nature. So it could potentially be removed or moved to a different location. It's a herbaceous species, so it's not well rooted or anything like that, like a mature tree. So there are provisions on a provincial level that you can address some of those species at risk. It's a little bit easier to deal with plants than it is animals.
Anything further?
No, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much again.
Oh,
Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, can you go back to the slide that, I don't have the number, but it talked about triggering the EIS with the region?
right here. Is this the one that you're talking about? We have the trigger the requirement on the bottom.
Yeah. And so there will be pieces of property that you're saying you're recommending we remove the EC, but because we're not going to be doing this with the region, when the region sees it, the region's going to trigger.
Yes.
Am I hearing that?
Yes,
Am
that's
I saying that
yeah.
right?
Yeah, you're saying it correctly.
So my question is, what can we do to eliminate that nuisance for whoever it is that would say, oh, we have to get an EC overlay? Well, the town says it's okay, but now the region's saying you have to do it. And you have to do an EIS, I mean, how can we get?
I would advise that you share the report with the region of Niagara, especially your updated mapping, so that they can bring theirs into compliance. This is the most recent and probably the most comprehensive data that we have for this area, relative to even what the regional has in terms of their mapping. So it may be prudent for the town or the municipality to touch base with the region with regards to the updates to your mapping, and provide them with the background as well that supports why the designations were removed.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anything further from council? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Brings us to our next delegation, Mr. Jeff McIntyre, 3435 Birdie Street, regarding the effects of marijuana grow-op operations in rural residential areas.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. I have a bit of a cold right now, so that's why I was outside. My name is Jeff McIntyre. I bought the property at 3435 Birdie Street about 14 months ago with my spouse. The group that I'm here to represent, that we've kind of come together over the last little while, the majority have lived there for 15 plus years along the Ridge Road area, or have in other rural areas in town. The longest serving one is 63 years. He inherited the farm from his parents, still resides there. Can't be here tonight, I don't think, but so that's just by way of an introduction. I want to first say, I don't know what the perception of our group is, but we're not anti-marijuana use in any way. We're not anti-marijuana grow-up. We don't want to restrict anybody's access to marijuana, but we also have concerns as property owners and homeowners as to the lack of regulation and the lack of bylaws surrounding the growth of more industrial type grow-ops that are coming online now. I think we've seen over the last little while other municipalities have made interim bylaws a thing, which is encouraging. We'd like to see that here as well. Something similar to Niagara-on-the-Lake, Pelham, Niagara Falls, Port Colborne. I realize that there's been legal issues with some of those and some not, but I think our concerns need to be addressed as well. The current legislation does not reflect in any way the type of industrial usage that we're looking at now. The ones I'm aware of in our area are all significantly larger than the backyard grow-up type of things that we're going to be addressing. We want to look at the use of agricultural zoning. In a lot of cases in our area, we're lucky enough we have a pretty big geographic area, but that also means that there's a lot of rural residential properties in our area. Most of those residential properties, rural residential properties, are attached to agricultural land as they've been severed off over the years by the previous owners. We're looking for some protection for the rural residential residents. In our case, just because the way that the federal government has downloaded this onto rural municipalities, I think, have been caught kind of flat-footed, and that's to be expected. I think it feels like to us that there's, in our dealings with the town, whether it's the town officials or some of the elected officials, that there's been a reluctance to get involved because there's the idea, well, we don't have any laws to do anything about it, so we don't want to get involved. It's a federal problem, it's a provincial problem. We're asking you guys to step up and help us today and protect us. If the federal government, the provincial government don't want to take an interest, or they don't feel that our property rights, our rights as property owners are important, then we need you guys to step up and be the first line of defense for us. There's some issues that we would like to address. Where the current setbacks come from in the medical marijuana bylaw. I tried to do research, I couldn't find out where those came from. We have concerns about controls on light and air pollution. How is that going to be controlled? How can it be enforced? Groundwater protection. I think, as with any industry that's new and up and coming, there are going to be some companies that are ethical and responsible in how they do things, and there are going to be some that are trying to cut corners in the interest of making money. Who is going to monitor groundwater protection for our residents, many of whom are on wells? Almost all of whom are on wells. There's the concern of pesticides and fertilizer leaching into their well water. There's also questions about the water table. What happens if a grow operation in Fort Erie chooses to drill a well and use groundwater out of the groundwater? How are residents going to be protected in terms of if their wells go dry, if their water is contaminated? Obviously, the cost of building a cistern is quite extensive, and a lot of people don't have that. We also have concerns about run into wetlands, endangered species, and waste disposal from these facilities. When the plants are done with, what happens to them? Is the town responsible for, can they throw them at the waste facilities, or are they responsible for them? Do they get, these are all questions that aren't answered, and there's no bylaw to regulate these things. We also have concerns for tourism. In our particular area, it is immediately adjacent to the Battle of Ridgeway. It's been noted by the Historical Society and various other government organizations that the first 9 soldiers who died in defense of Canada died at the Battle of Ridgeway. In rural areas, especially down towards Lake Erie, what are the bylaws going to be pertaining to grow operations within the Crystal Beach area towards the beach and people's enjoyment of that? Fort Erie prides itself on tourism and and we have many American friends who come over. Are their interests as property tax owners going to be respected as well? We have questions regarding the air quality. The Public Health Ontario Evidence Brief points out that the odor from marijuana grow operations can impact quality of life, sense of well-being, and contrigger physical symptoms. How does this affect the health and well-being of our existing cyclists and horse riders and people who are already living in the community? What are the effects on infrastructure? Particularly in rural roads, the roads and the road beds aren't maybe as strong as they would be in the city. The same applies to bridges. And if cisterns are used, what is the policy on use of public water station facilities? Are traffic management reports going to be required for these facilities? Other concerns that have been brought forward, privacy and policing. These operations have to have an incredible amount of security towards them, with many of their cameras and lights pointing outwards. Some have reported that they're using drones. So what are the regulations regarding this from the town? Who pays for the bylaw enforcement? It doesn't seem very fair to me that the residents who are not benefiting from this would have to pay, but that's how it probably will be. Who pays for Niagara Regional Police presence? Personally, in my own property, I've had difficulty getting them to come out when I've had ATV users, snowmobilers riding on our fields. Their solution was for me to go to the office in Fort Erie and report it there. But if there's more of this sort of thing happening, and there seems to be more crime based on what I read in the newspaper around grow-ups, how is that going to be reconciled with the Niagara Regional Police and the local residents? There are examples of theft, trespassing, violent crime. Can also lead to increased stuff in things like trespassing. I know many of the residents along Ridge Road that we're sort of representing have small children. Are they going to want people going through the yards? What are the protections for them in the cases that people want to go to have a look at this grow operation or stuff like that? The other problem is that with there being no bylaw in place, the long-term impacts are unknown. If we don't follow the suit of the municipalities who did enact interim bylaws, is Fort Erie going to become a haven for the whole industry? At this point, everywhere else has done studies and has, most communities have put in interim bylaw effects to try and study these things and at least come up with answers. In Pelham, they have a cannabis control committee that allows the city, the investors, the residents to all be part of the solution. I think that's what we'd like to see, maybe something along those lines here, because for long-term residents who've paid taxes a lot, it's hard to swallow the idea that, this is going to bring 40 jobs to the community when people have been paying their pretty high rate of taxes in rural areas for 15 plus years. Just in conclusion, I want to say that the old bylaw is not effective in regulating current mass production operations. The way that marijuana is produced now is done on an industrial level. It's mostly grown indoors. It's not even greenhouses anymore. It's a factory-style setting, the same as factory farming would be. We're asking for the town to represent our viewpoints on this and at least consider looking further into things before we approve any further marijuana grow operations in our community. We're asking you to protect the rural residents and put an immediate cessation to all activities pertaining to marijuana facilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre, for your presentation. Comments and questions? Councillor Butler?
Yes, I know. Madam Chair, I have to declare a conflict of interest with this particular presentation. I didn't realize this gentleman was speaking with respect to that. So if you could note that, that would be great.
Thank you. Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Mr. McIntyre for a very thoughtful presentation, but on the basis of your last comment about a moratorium on all marijuana facilities, I'm going to have to declare a conflict of interest as well. I have a client that is involved in a marijuana facility in Stevensville.
Thank you. So noted. Councillor Dubanow?
I will not be declaring a conflict. Thank you very much, Mr. McIntyre, for your presentation and taking the time to come out and speak with us. We really do appreciate that. I just wanted to ask you a few questions because you had mentioned during your presentation that you acknowledge that this is agricultural land. You're aware that it's zoned for agricultural uses. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you had mentioned issues related to odor, groundwater control, and I'm just wondering, help me understand here. Because it's agricultural land, if we had a poultry farm, which my understanding is that they can smell quite a bit, if we had a hog farm that had a tailing pond to handle the runoff, how would you expect that we would address those kind of situations with what are considered traditionally agricultural uses versus an agricultural use that today is at the forefront and it's new and it's something we haven't dealt with before, but we have similar challenges and similar concerns as we do previous uses. So I'm just wondering why we would stop those when we wouldn't stop poultry farms or hog farms or any other agricultural use on an agricultural property?
Well, my suggestion would be that there are, in Canada at least, there's 200 years of poultry farming, pig farming, and various other kinds of agriculture that have had extensive studies done about them. The effects are known of those studies, or of those farming practices, and they have become accepted over time. In this case, where we're considering industrial level marijuana cultivation, we don't know what those effects are. And I think there should be studies done on it because, I mean, we don't know, like, based on what I've read in the newspaper from other municipalities, there's been a lot of problems with a certain lawlessness about the grow facilities and going over their licenses and doing things in a nefarious way. And I think that before we commit to the environmental aspects of all this, that I think that there should be some studies and some consideration given to the environmental effects and to the groundwater effects and to all these other things. In industrial marijuana cultivation, you're looking at, depending on what study you read, 15 to 20 liters per plant a day. Well, if you have 10,000 plants, that means you're at 220,000-ish, $200,000 liters of water. Well, that's a lot of water, whether you have to bring it in by cistern or by through groundwater or through other means. So I think the effects on the local residents need to be considered, and I think that there needs to be studies done on how much traffic the rural roads can handle, how it's going to be policed, what happens if, sorry, I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question, but I was speaking with my water delivery guy the other day, and he said it's already hard to get water at the Bertie Street station because there's trucks lined up 3 or 4 at a time already. So there's all these floating considerations that kind of mesh together, and some of them are individual. But it seems to me that without an accurate bylaw and without some forethought and consideration given into it, that we're opening up a lot of future problems. This isn't a problem just for this year. It's a problem that's going to be in 10 years. Well, it's not a problem, but they're concerns that need to be addressed for now and in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years.
And I appreciate that, and thank you very much. I imagine that if we had, for example, a soybean farm or an alfalfa farm or something along those lines, they would be using water as well, regardless of whether it's cannabis or whether
It rains.
Well, you can. It's an agricultural use. Madam Chair.
Excuse me, can we please keep order?
So, and I thank you for bringing that up. The other point as well, you had mentioned, taxpayers. Are you aware that the town of Pelham is being sued for their control bylaw right now?
Yes.
Okay. So the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for all those legal fees. So taxpayers in this community, if we, well, we're,
Okay, look, the councillor's speaking. Mr. McIntyre had an opportunity to speak. You're all going to have an opportunity to speak at some point because there'll be a public meeting on any of these facilities that are going up. So please let Councillor Dubanow and Councillor Noyes do their job. We'll listen to what Mr. McIntyre has to say, and in due course, we'll listen to all of you.
thank you very much, Your Worship, and I'm trying to listen more than anything else here, so I appreciate that. So Pelham right now is being sued, which means that their taxpayers are going to be on the hook. Are you aware of how much these, and again, going back to being an agricultural operation here, and I stress that they are an agricultural operation, but for an agricultural operation, are you aware of how much employees make working at these facilities?
Like for the marijuana?
The employees, how much of a wage they're paid?
Yeah, from what I can Google, it's most of the jobs are more minimum wage, $17 to $20 type jobs.
That's not the information I have. I actually had the opportunity to speak with one of the owners of a company here in town. They pay their employees between 50 and 100 grand a year.
To do what?
It's a living wage.
What?
And just to expand on that, as I was canvassing and going door to door, all I heard from residents was the need for well-paying jobs in this community and the desire to have a reason to stay in Fort Erie and live here and raise a family here. So I was just wondering, were you aware of that? I mean, they're certainly not minimum wage jobs. It's actually, Niagara College operates almost a cannabis cultivation program. It's an educated position. I was just wondering if you were aware.
Oh, I'm very aware. But I think that this is where, and as far as taxpayers paying lawyers, well, that's part of municipal council's job. And every level of government uses lawyers to negotiate these tricky type of pieces of legislation or these tricky types of situation. So I feel that if everybody was given if the courts decide one thing, then that's what the court is for. The same way that, there's going to be people that are going to take the town to court or the town takes people to court depending on how things go. But lawyers are a part of the process, unfortunately, in bureaucracies and democracies. So I feel that in a case like this, you have a lot of residents who are asking the city to protect them and balance the interests of business and rural residents. So if you want to go all business, then you dispose of the lawyers. If you feel that the residents that have lived here and paid a lot of tax over their life deserve to be represented, then that's what should be done. But that's why we're here to talk about it, because to address your main concern, yes, I'm aware.
Okay, no, and I appreciate that. So just I gotta ask you straight out, you're okay with the town gets sued? If we prohibit all marijuana grow operations in Fort Erie, you're okay if the taxpayers are on the hook for getting sued?
I said at the start that we're not anti-marijuana grow up. What I said was that we need to have rules in place that allow them to do their business in more remote areas of the town as opposed to in more rural residential areas.
So,
Councillor Dubanow?
thank you. So, now you know what? I appreciate the presentation. And you know what? I appreciate the answers you gave me. I apologize if I come across as confrontational. This is just a very difficult issue with a lot of sides on this, and I really, really appreciate you coming out and speaking. It takes something else to come out and stand here, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if I could just add one thing. The town has bylaws that won't allow you to have a kid's treehouse in your yard. But Yeah, I know. They're making my friend take one down. So, but we have bylaws about things like tree houses and the size of sheds, but we don't have a bylaw about an industrial grow operation that is affecting the residents, affecting the environment, and all of the other things we talked about. So it seems pretty negligent to me on the part of the town not to at least consider this and address it, because you can't have a child's treehouse, but you can have a grow up of whatever size you want as long as it fits onto agricultural land.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. McIntyre. Thank you for your presentation. And I just wanted to touch base on a few things. First of all, this has been a whole learning experience for me as well. When they legalized marijuana, I wasn't in support of that when they put selling marijuana in municipalities. It really threw me for a loop as well. So to residents' points, I understand and I get it. I get where you're coming from. The town of Fort Erie has spent a lot of time with regard to residential zoning and marijuana growing. We've made motion to the federal government. I've had a number of issues in my ward in particular. We've reached out to the policing. It really is a federal government legislation. And I don't want you to think that, this council is saying, hey, we're not going to help you because it's not our level of government. We have been reviewing this. We have been looking at bylaws. There's a report on the floor this evening. And we really have been lobbying to federal government to look at these policies that are in place, in particular in residential areas. So my question to you is, and getting back to where my stand has been on all of this, I'm understanding now that marijuana usage and production of marijuana is here. It's something that we have to deal with, and we're looking at it. I'm understanding more of the legislation in place for agricultural property, and I'm starting to get a bit more comfortable with policy, procedure, and the mechanisms in place for protection of the things that you have mentioned. But during your presentation, you kind of made mention to the fact that you're opposed to this in residential zoning areas, and I am as well, but then you also alluded to agricultural zoning. So are you opposed to licensing in agricultural zoning as well?
No, there needs to be policies and setbacks in place to protect the rural residential areas. There's lots of huge fields out towards, towards Port Colborne, let's say, where there aren't houses around for, a kilometer. That's a lot different than putting a grow operation, because there's agricultural land, on a place between Ridge Road and Stevensville Road. On Ridge Road, there's 50 houses within a half a kilometer approximately. There's also a trailer park that has 60 summer residents who pay in the neighborhood of $4,000 a year, from what I'm told. I don't know that. I'm relying on a friend for that information. But that's less than 300 meters from the operation that's proposed near our group. So to say a land is agricultural is an oversimplification in a municipality like ours, because a lot of the land has been severed, as I mentioned, has been severed off over the years and have now become neighborhoods surrounding agriculturally zoned land, because the land over time was severed by landowners over the last 100 years for development. And now we're at a point where, some of the agricultural land is surrounded completely by rural residential neighborhoods.
Okay, so it's mixed zoning that you're referring to.
Yes, sorry if I wasn't clear.
Sure. And I can't do this now, but later on I can certainly ask our planning director some questions with regard to policy and how much leverage the municipality does have with regard to things that you had mentioned. But I know, this is something that we've really been looking at and discussing, and it's not that we don't want to be involved. It's just, again, it is federal policy. So I also encourage you, if you haven't so far, to reach out to your member of parliament as well.
Yeah, we have addressed that. And just to allude to your, no, that's okay. I can't remember what I was going to say.
But thank you very much for your presentation. I understand, and I appreciate the time that you've taken tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Any further comments or questions? I have a few. I just want to Mr. McIntyre, I just want to make sure that I'm capturing what you were asking. I was taking some notes here, that your concern is about the need for regulation and control
Yes.
of the growing of marijuana. You brought up the need for setbacks, the concerns about light and air pollution, the need for enforcement and who will pay for that, the groundwater protection, the use of pesticides and how it may affect the surrounding neighborhoods, the water table with the extensive use of water that's required for marijuana, environmental issues, the waste disposal of the parts of the plants that are not being used, how it may affect tourism, air quality and the quality of life. And you talked about the odor in relation to that, and the infrastructure of roads and bridges not being able to sustain the traffic that may attract, and the cost of the taxpayers to enforce rules and regulations.
Yes.
Did I capture it?
Pretty well.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for your presentation. Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. McIntyre, for being here tonight. I just want to let you know that the report is going to be coming forward tonight, and I agree with a lot of your concerns, and I'll be addressing them with our staff as when it comes up, and I'm hoping that the people will stay and listen to some of the questions that we have regarding the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. That brings us to our next delegation, Mr. Victor Matori, Sullivan Manning, 456941 Ontario Limited, Paul Silvestri. Supported the recommendation for Ellison Woods draft plan of subdivision. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of council. My name is Muratori. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of Sullivan Manning in St. Catharines, and we represent the owner of what is called the Alliston Woods subdivision, and the report that you're going to hear tonight as the request for the further extension of draft plan approval. Before I get into that, I think it warrants a minute to talk about what I perceive to be a misconception out there as to a debate about a certain property owner's property, that somehow or another our client is the one who is forcing this issue. I want anyone who believes that to go and take a look at the Spears High Point secondary plan, which we had no part in dealing with, which recommends a connection of the development to Garrison Road at a particular point that joins Craft Road. If you look behind the Spears High Point secondary plan, you will also see that that request came from the region, who are the controlling agency on Garrison Road, since this is a regional road. So it isn't our client, to be clear, it is not our client that is demanding this. We are driven to that position simply by the municipal documents. I just want to make sure that that is clearly understood by the general public, because I think it's important. On the question of the how this acquisition is being dealt with, I know that council is extremely frustrated. Let me tell you that my client, who has the dollars in the ground, is equally frustrated that this has taken as long as it has. We did make an offer years ago for the property based on an appraisal of the property. We never got a formal response, and I'm telling you this because it's been told to me by the previous lawyer from another firm who was dealing with the matter. We got a verbal response that the owner wanted 10 times the offer. And you know what? No fault here. If the owner doesn't want to sell and it's their property, then we have no control over this. At a recent meeting with your staff at regional headquarters, staff asked us, would we be prepared, because that previous appraisal and previous offer was a long time ago, would we be prepared to update the appraisal and make a new offer? We agreed to do that. We retained the appraisal firm of Ridley and Associates, AAPI accredited appraisers. I'm told by my office that about 4 o'clock today, we received a copy of that appraisal. I have not seen it. I was out of the office this afternoon. But what we undertook to do is to take that appraisal, and on the basis of that appraisal, before December 31st of this year, we would submit a new offer to the owner based on the appraisal. We will send a copy of that appraisal and the offer to council, so you will see exactly what we have done. Do I think this is going to change anything? No, I do not. I do not think it'll change a thing. For a variety of reasons that we don't need to go into, but it's, again, something completely out of the developer's control. And that's the point I need to make here. It isn't as if the developer has done nothing. The developer went out and bought the property that adjoins this, that fronts on Garrison Road, negotiated with the person, arrived at a price, and bought it. We simply have no ability to deal with this matter directly with the owner. Now, that's not the only thing that we are doing. At the request of your planning staff, we are looking at an alternative that would go around that person's property, and hopefully we can come up with a configuration for that intersection that still meets good planning and good traffic practices. A variety of configurations have been sent both to the region and your planning staff, and we're hoping that one of those will fit it from a traffic control point of view. That's not to say that even if we do get to that point, we can necessarily do that, because it now opens up negotiations with a totally different landowner. At the end of the day, we are trying our very best to come to a conclusion of this matter. Whether we'll be able to do that or not, I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I don't know the answer to that. All I'm saying is that we have a process. We've met with the regional staff at least twice. We've met with your staff 3 times, again, dealing on this specific issue. We're as frustrated as you are, but the only way to work our way through this is by an additional period of time. And we think that the report made by planning staff is ultimately sensible and the least costly way for us to pursue the matter. This is what we're doing. I hope you understand that we're trying our very best to get this job done. And those are my submissions, but I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for coming here tonight. I just want to get back to the secondary plan, and I need a clear understanding.
The Spears High Point secondary plan?
Yeah, I need a clear understanding as to what the regions, what did the region say? The region said.
All right, so the Spears High Point secondary plan, in anticipating the development which is proposed for Alliston Woods, determined that the best point of intersection would be, the developer has other access to Garrison Road. Let's be clear, this is not as if we don't have access. This is simply following what the secondary plan says, that this would be the best point of intersection because eventually it will be signalized. It is the region's position that what the function of Craft Road and would best be suited if the intersections could align. I understand from my inquiries that that request got into your secondary plan because the region asked for it to be that way in the typical consultation process that goes into any secondary plan process. The region would comment on anything that dealt with regional roads. So that's my understanding of how we got there. Is it an absolute mandate? Not as I read it, but it's certainly the preferred course of action. So when the development went forward, when the plan of subdivision went forward, the developer was told, and it was a condition in the draft plan approval, that he would have to align that way and try to acquire these lands for the purpose of that alignment. My client's already spent $250,000 trying to achieve this, so it's not as if we've done nothing to do this. We've just run into the proverbial wall here, so we are now looking for an alternative. We've discussed the alternative. 4 alignment proposals have been submitted. 2 really don't work. We know that they won't work for traffic purposes. We're even looking at the possibility of a traffic circle instead of a traditional signalization of Garrison and Craft intersection. So we're trying to beat this dead horse as hard as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you very much, but from what I'm hearing is the region commented on the secondary plan and said their opinion is that it would be best, in their opinion, if you aligned Craft Road with the subdivision, but now you're telling me it's a condition
No.
in your draft plan of approval.
No, let's be clear about this.
Is that not what you said?
Yes, but I think I want you to be clear in what I'm saying. The region would comment at the time of the preparation of the secondary plan.
Yes.
But then it becomes a secondary plan. It's part of your official plan documents in the municipality. It's no longer a recommendation. It's now a document that we as a developer have to deal with. We have to deal with it. And so we've tried to deal with it. But I guess I'm saying to you, we can't do the impossible here. We can't do the impossible. So we are now looking for an alternative. The region didn't say you must acquire this property. All the region has said is we want you to align the new road so it aligns at the intersection with Craft. So we need to line up the proposed road so it crosses Garrison and aligns with Craft. That's what we were asked to do, and that's in the subdivided, those are in the conditions of draft plan approval. But if you look at condition number 55 in the condition of draft plan approval, it will remove any question that this originated from the region, because it simply says that before we start construction, we need to get the region to sign off on that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Lubberts? This is now playing fun and games with me too. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Mortori.
Thank you very much.
That brings us to report number PDS 53, 2019, adoption of bird-friendly design standards for site plan control and bird-friendly guidelines pamphlet for residents.
Chair,
The report's now on the floor. Comments or questions?
yeah, I'd like to move that we defer that to the January 20th, 2020 meeting at the request of staff.
Okay. For deferral? Any comments in regard to deferring this, in regard to the timing? Seeing none, all those in favor of deferring it? It carries. That brings us to report number PDS 70, 2019, Environmental Conservation Area Assessment Report, Town of Fort Erie Industrial Lands. The report is now on the floor. Thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Any comments or questions? Mayor Redekop.
Well, I think this report clearly highlights the concern that we've got with respect to industrial land and the need for us to do something more than what we've been doing lately. And I entirely agree with the comments made by the Economic Development Corporation with respect to this. We now find that we have less land in the inventory period, and that doesn't include land that isn't serviced and isn't really completely marketable. So I'm wondering whether this will now be an impetus for us to move towards trying to expand the urban boundary to provide for some industrial land.
Did you want
Mr. Brady, maybe?
Mr. Brady to comment on that?
Certainly through you to the mayor. This report clearly identifies that there's certain lands which currently cannot be used, but if it's approved and if council directs staff to deal with the appropriate OPA and ZBA, we'll actually be expanding the amount of industrial lands available slightly. So that is helpful. It's not helpful to the full extent, but it certainly is helpful. The larger question of the need for more industrial land, in the past, when I've been asked this question, I've often said that we must await the region in terms of dealing with a municipal comprehensive review. There have certainly been some movement on behalf of the province that may make it an opportunity for the town to take more of an initiative in this matter. And in that regard, my staff are in the process of putting together a report that should be coming in February, and it will outline at a fairly high level how we can do that. And it'll outline to council what steps council will have to authorize staff to take to be able to do that. So the report in itself is helpful, then if we get the direction that's outlined in the report to help a bit. But clearly, yes, there is a need for more industrial land, and the methodology for doing so, there seems to be a little more opportunity for the town to take initiative at it based on some of the changes that the Ford government has brought into place in the recent past.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, thank you. So any projected timing with respect to that type of report?
Mr. Brady?
The report of town staff will be at council in February.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the report? The report carries. That brings us to report number PDS 71, 2019, proposed combined official plan and zoning bylaw amendment, 745 Crescent Road, Regional Municipality of Niagara, American applicant. The report's now on the floor. We'll give Councillor Zanko the credit. Since three hands went up at the same time. Comments or questions? Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought this report was very interesting. One of the things that I thought was missing was the fact that the region didn't recognize that this was a great opportunity for affordable housing, and recognizing that this council has been really pushing for mixed-use affordable housing. I think this is the perfect spot and perfect location for one to go up. I'm thinking that in the staff report on page 9, it did recognize that a 3-story, perhaps 12 to 16 units, even possibly 18 units could fit on that particular location with parking spaces available for each of the tenants. I'd like to see that location, considering the fact that it is on transit route and is ideally suited to having affordable housing, that we make an amendment to this report to include the provisions for a multi-unit apartment building. And I think that that's written up on page 11, but I would need clarification on that to make sure that I'm correct.
Mr. Brady?
Through you to the councillor, or to council in general. Yes, there was discussion of the possibility of using this property in a more affordable fashion through having an apartment on the site. The region didn't apply for that, but we certainly, council can add it. We have no issue with that, and the outline for doing so is identified within the report. The issue was raised at the public meeting, but I'm not certain that the neighbors are aware that that would come back. So council is going to have to put its mind to whether or not it would be appropriate for there to be a second public meeting if that change occurs. But if council directed us to make that change, there's actually a couple of different ways that change can be made. One is that the apartment use could be added as a range of uses for the site. Or alternatively, if you want to make an even stronger comment, you could simply identify that the only use that you would provide for on that site would be for the apartment building. It's up to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Councillor Butler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In light of Ms. Bradnam's presentation today, we often forget that there are individuals that are or do have accessibility issues, and we don't provide enough housing that's affordable and addresses that as well. And I'm wondering if we can combine the two. I'm not opposed to a second public meeting if council so desires that. But I think it's very important that we have an opportunity to build an apartment building that addresses some of the affordable needs. And we know that we're in crisis right now, not only for our senior citizens, but for our youth and our young families. They're finding it difficult to buy property that's affordable. And we have to drive home here in Fort Erie that we need our young families to be located here in order for this municipality to continue to grow. So I would like to move that we include that as part of the solution for this report.
I'm not sure whether you have to make a notice of motion
Amendment.
or an amendment.
So I'd like to amend the report to include the three-story apartment building that will contain up to 18 units for affordable housing.
Just a clarification, are you saying that would be restricted use to just the apartment building? No, that would be included with the others. Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, I'll speak in favor of that amendment, provided there's a second public meeting, because I think the magnitude is so significant, the neighbors should at least have the opportunity. So I think that means we'll have to defer preparation of the bylaw until there's been a second public meeting, which will require a second amendment, which I'll bring forward if Councillor Butler's amendment passes.
Any further? Amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor of the amended report? The report carries as amended. And I'm wondering if I can turn the chair over, because I did want to be part of the discussion for the PDS 72 2019.
Not there yet.
Oh.
We've just done an amendment.
Oh,
So we haven't passed but I'd like to move a further amendment that there be a second public meeting with respect to the changes in the zoning of this parcel of land, and that the bylaw postponed until, presentation of the bylaw be postponed until that second meeting has been held.
There's another amendment on the floor. Any comments or questions on the amendment? Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support that, and I agree. I think if you look at the first public meeting, there wasn't a very large turnout. So I'm hopeful that the second meeting will provide a better turnout within the area. And also just a suggestion, and I'm not sure if this is possible, but perhaps we can expand the notification, because I think just the immediate neighbors are being made aware. But if there is an apartment building, it would affect a couple of the streets that are neighboring that particular property rather than just the Crescent Road residents. So maybe we can consider that as well.
Mr. Brady?
I have no issues with expanding the notification, but council will have to be prescriptive as to what they wish that notification expansion to be.
Are we going to be giving him direction now or later?
How about 800 feet?
800 feet? And I understand that this road, this particular property starts and ends, it's between two roads, right? So it would be both roads who would be given that information to. Any further comments, Mayor Redekop?
So I'll make that part of my my amendment, that notice be given to people within 800 feet of the site.
Thank you. Although, any questions or comments on the amendment? The amendment carries. Now I'm putting back the report as amended on the floor. Any comments or questions based on the amendments made to this report? Seeing none, all those in favor? The report carries. Now I would like to turn the chair over. I wonder if Councillor McDermott, would you take over the chair? Councillor Butler has a conflict. That's the 72-2019.
Can I get him over? Councillor Zanko?
Chair, I wonder if I could just indicate that I'm going to declare a conflict on this because I think the discussion's going to get into an area where I have a pecuniary interest. I've provided a sheet to the clerk, so I'm going to sit back.
Thank you, Your Worship. Comments or questions? Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the report and reading it over the weekend, and the first that we're looking at here is we're dealing with just production of marijuana in residential areas. But it seems to me that, you know, it's we need to deal with more than just residential areas. I think we need to look at the whole town, urban, rural, you know, everywhere. So I'm just wondering if this report's really covering exactly what what's being discussed. And secondly, that's the first part of the report. Secondly, when I looked through the report, there's talk about the official plan and zoning bylaw amendments and stuff. But those ones that those were dealt with the marijuana for medical purposes regulations. And so now here we are we got these grow ops and they can grow for recreational. And is that what they're supplying? And, you know, this report bounces back and forth from medical marijuana to recreational marijuana and back and forth and this and that. Very, very confusing to look at this report and get a good handle on what's been going on in other areas, what's been going on in other municipalities. What does the federal government allow you to do as far as having some kind of control in your municipality? To me, this report bounced all over the place. I'm not saying anything about staff putting it together, but it's probably what happens when, you know, you're putting a report together with things, in our case, we don't know a whole lot about, you know. But having said that, there is some concern about what we can do and what we can't do. And I've been told by our staff in this chambers that it's regulated by the federal government. There's not much we can do about it. But from what I can see and from what I'm reading outside of this report, there are things that we can do. And there are some interim control bylaws that we can put in place. And I understand that, you know, those interim bylaws are being challenged, but there's no ruling that says whether it's legal or illegal for us to do that. And Mr. Chair, that is why we need an interim control bylaw so that we can find out, is it legal for us to put bylaws in place. If you read the report, interim control bylaw is good for a year. If someone wants to challenge the interim control bylaw, they can challenge it. But to me, why would you challenge something that a year from now we're going to have to deal with? We're going to have something in place. We can ask for an extension for another year, yes, but you know, there's no guarantee that we'll get the extension. But I don't think for 1 minute that any court or the federal government or the provincial government is going to penalize the town of Fort Erie or any other municipality for looking into and getting the studies and getting the answers to the questions that we need. And so I have a question now after making my statement. And my concern is just what the gentleman that was up here earlier, Mr. McIntyre, alluded to, and it's the groundwater. I brought it up at a previous meeting with Laura Road, I think it was, and I asked if they were going to be using groundwater or well water. And from what I understand, St. John's Church, which is on Ridgemount Road, their well is getting lower and lower. From what I understand, the well pump was 20 feet in the water. And now they're telling them that they got about 5 feet of water in their well. I heard this past week that there's some expansion going to go on at the Queenie. They have ordered tons and tons of stone from Walker Brothers. They've been doing some blasting and they've been doing some digging and stuff. And now I've heard, I don't know how much truth there is to it, but there's another gentleman on Bowen Road. Now they don't have any water in their well. Walker, from what I'm being told, said that they're going to look into this and they're going to see if it has anything to do with them. They're not admitting guilt, and there's nothing wrong with what Walker was doing. They're doing their business, right? They may have cracked the rock and then lowered the water table. Now the water's going somewhere else. I don't know. But we need to know. And I'm going to ask staff, does staff know what kind of water we have in our water table, and can that water table facilitate not just one marijuana operation, but others? Do we know that?
Mr. Brady?
I'm going to concentrate on the one question that was asked at the end, which is whether or not staff have any understanding of the water tables. The issuance of permits to take water is something which the province controls, and the province looks at large withdrawals of water to determine whether or not it can be sustained within the aquifer. So this is a matter which is dealt with by a provincial agency as a part of their review when a large drawer of water, like a marijuana operation or other types of operations for that matter, would come and ask for a permit to put in a well.
So thank you very much, Mr. Brady. So you're saying that it would happen after the application is made?
It would happen when an application is made by the applicant to the province to draw water.
So I'm assuming that an application has been made, right?
I'm not sure which application you're referring to, sir.
Or the one on Ridge Road.
Is
I'm
that what
I'm
we're
assuming
referring to?
that was made, right?
If you're referring to the application that may be coming on Ridge Road, currently there is no application on Ridge Road for either a marijuana operation or any form of operation whatsoever.
No application to the town,
That's correct.
but what about the province?
I wouldn't be aware of whether or not an application has been made to the province.
Mr. Chair, if I may, then there's a lot of activity on Ridge Road, and they're doing a lot of work. They purchased the property. They put up a fence. Would they be just doing this on speculation? They're spending a lot of money, and they haven't even applied for an application. Can you
I'll
comment on
reiterate,
that?
as it stands to date, all that I'm aware of is that a fence has gone up, there's been some ground cleared, and that there has been a driveway installed, none of which requires an application to the planning department. There's been some discussion that there may be an application coming, but as of right now, I do not have an application in front of me on Ridge Road. When we do, it will be for a site plan application, which is not an application for permission to use Ridge Road for it, because that area on Ridge Road permits a marijuana operation to be there. The zoning simply permits it. What it would be for is for a site plan application, which would deal with such things as setbacks, air emissions, contamination of groundwater, and all of those things. And that's what we've done routinely for a number of applications in town, and and the town of Fort Erie has approved them, and they've been built. And I can go through a list if you like, but there are a number of marijuana operations which have gone through that process in town on lands where they are permitted to be, as is this.
Well, thank you very much. And if I may just, I'll ask one more question for now. So the application hasn't been made to the town. And Mr. Brady, do you know if an application has been made to the federal government or the provincial government?
I have no knowledge of that. The federal government has not kept the municipality informed when it comes to applications that are before it, because they believe that it's proprietary to them. In fact, they may provide us information at some point down the line about whether or not an application is going to be approved by them.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chair, I have to ask one more question. If our planning department doesn't feel that it's proprietary for the province or the federal government to tell us what's going on, are we not stakeholders in this? Are they not going to notify stakeholders on applications being applied for? I mean, this to me doesn't make sense, but I'll let someone else ask some questions, but that doesn't make sense to me, that we're not a stakeholder and we wouldn't be informed.
Councillor Dubanow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much to Mr. Kernahan for putting this report together. I'm going to support the report because it cleans up some language, clarifies some situations with regard to setbacks and a few other things. I appreciate that we have an audience here tonight that's very concerned about this issue. And there's a certain level of frustration that I have because we're between a rock and a hard place. The feds have put in place a process that doesn't empower municipalities very much, if you will, to actually have a lot of control over this. And there's other bodies as well, like the Farm Operation Board, and I probably said the name wrong, but that make it very difficult for municipalities to distinguish between one farming operation and another. So that someone's got to be the bad cop. And I appreciate you booing me and jeering me, and I get that, and that's your right. And I appreciate you're doing that. What I was trying to bring out is, you can have a poultry farm, you can have an alfalfa farm, which uses a lot of water. You can have a hog farm, which has tailing ponds, which can affect groundwater. You can have all of these things that happen on agricultural land. And yet, the issue seems to be with cannabis. Now, I don't know if that's because this is something new, and there's still that feeling of unknown moving into the future, where we're going to go, what's going to happen. It's a good concern to have, but at the same time, we're limited in what we can do. And it becomes very, very difficult to enact bylaws that we know are going to be challenged, that we know could get overturned, could cost some municipality money, and could have an impact on economic growth in this community, because they do create jobs. I mean, I sit here, I'm 30.
Please.
Question?
Yeah.
I thought I could speak to the report. Can I speak to the report? Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to summarize here why I feel the way I do, so that when the people leave the room here, they don't think that I'm a big cannabis guy trying to, well, some of you might, and I appreciate that, but look at it from my perspective as a young man who's got a 5-year-old daughter, a 7-year-old son, who campaigned door to door saying that he wanted to see jobs created in this community, so when his kids grow up, they could live in Fort Erie, earn a living wage, buy a house, and I could see my grandkids grow up in this community. Now, when I'm hearing that these farms pay 50 to 100 grand a year, and I mean, there might be some disagreements here, and that's fine, but I'm hearing something different, which means that there's more information out there than there is. It becomes hard for me to think my daughter could grow up, could graduate GFES as one of the best high schools in the province, if not the country, could go to Niagara College, could go to the cannabis cultivation program right here in Niagara, could come back home to Fort Erie and work in one of these facilities and make a really good living wage that could support her family. And honestly, I'm supporting a family too. And when people are telling me that they want to see jobs and they want to see growth in the community and they want to see, the economic activity, I appreciate the concerns, but where does that line, where do we draw that line? And, what risks are we willing to take until that happens? So I'm going to support this report. I know there are probably people out there who disagree with my viewpoints on it, and I appreciate that, and I respect that. But going forward, there's a big potential economic benefit to communities. And at this point now, when I have young kids and I want to see my grandkids grow up in this community, it's really hard for me to turn that down. So,
Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do like this report. I actually commend staff for the amount of time that you've taken to put, some, I don't want to call it restrictions, but some policy in place pertaining to residential areas. I know we've had a good year on Craft Road in particular of a situation that has really impacted residents. So I thank you. I will be supporting this. And again, I'm not against marijuana. My concern all along when legalization came into place is that, sometimes the federal government comes up with a one-size-fits-all. And my concern always, not necessarily, about cannabis use, but how this would impact our municipality and other municipalities. And just as I suspected, we're all scrambling now to find policy to add protection. My question is to staff. So we've really looked at residential areas, and I know that, just for the residents in the atriums background, we had an issue that even the Niagara Regional Police Services wouldn't tell the town of Fort Erie if the residential area had a license to grow marijuana. It just was not within our jurisdiction to know this, and we couldn't even find that out. So I know my point is, I guess we're very limited with the amount that the government, of information the government will give us. So to Councillor Lubberts' point, I doubt the federal government's going to give us information on who's applied for licensing. My question to staff is, now, Mr. McIntyre had brought forward some concern about mixed zoning areas. I do support this report, and as we've come along down this road, I think it makes sense for agricultural areas to be able to have this type of business. Same thing with industrial. But one of the things I guess I didn't think of, and I know the residents here are looking at a particular property, which I haven't even driven by, so I'm sure when zoning comes into a place, we certainly will, because that's when council would be considering things like that. But back to my question to staff is, what about the mixed use zoning? Have you thought of that? And I mean, again, I know we don't have much control over this, but what type of thoughts do you have in that regard?
Mr. Brady?
Thank you for that. Marijuana is a very frustrating and difficult situation to deal with. Originally, it was, as we all heard, medical marijuana. And then we heard there was recreational marijuana. And then we've also heard that there's private marijuana. So that's not recreational, not necessarily medical, but rather being handed out by the federal government to people for their own private needs, whether they use it for medicine or it doesn't really matter. So the actual genesis of this report was the deal with the fact that we were having open growing marijuana in residentially designated areas. That's not what we're dealing with in Ridge Road. Okay? So Ridge Road is not, and I'm going to get booed, I'm sure, in a moment, is not a residential area. It's an agricultural area with rural residents in it. Okay?
So, look, folks, you have to allow staff. But I control the meeting. But I control the meeting, and the meeting. No, I control the meeting as the chair of the meeting. Look, we're trying to get through a meeting. You don't have to act like this is a hockey game.
So, as I was saying, this report was about that. What we have in the area of Ridge Road, which I think has brought the number of people here this evening, is we have an agricultural area which has a large number of rural residential homes in it. That's what we have, okay? The policies that we have in place simply are permissive to having we'll call it a factory-style marijuana operation there. Now, I have made it clear to anyone who's asked me that if I receive a site plan for that kind of an operation, that what we will look at is we will look at the technical elements of it. I can't, at a site plan stage, say no to the use, but what I can do is I can take a look at all the list of things that were identified today, and those which are technical, I can try and deal with. For example, smell, which is what the gentleman mentioned earlier. In the two operations that we have put in place, the two large ones, we made clear that there was to be no smell emanated from them and that scrubbing equipment needed to be put in place. The one on House Road and the one on Jarvis. To date, we've received absolutely no odor complaints from those two operations, which are both up and running and have been up and running for a while. So we seem to have some technical ability to deal with that. Groundwater contamination, yes, and others. In fact, we had a site plan approved not too long ago where we put in requirements for groundwater monitoring. Okay, so those kinds of things I can deal with. There are lawyers that would suggest I'm going too far in terms of dealing with these items, okay? There are lawyers that have represented Niagara Lake, for example, which have said, no, we shouldn't even be doing that. Well, we haven't been challenged on it yet, so we're going to continue to do so. But if you think we can say no to having marijuana operations in agricultural lands and we get challenged, I don't believe that we'll win. And that's why we've said as part of this interim control bylaw, we can't recommend it. We can't recommend something to council that we think is illegal. Okay? Secondly, there's two different things. There's the open growing marijuana and there's the in-house, in a building marijuana. To tell you the truth, the one I dislike the most is the open growing marijuana. Again, I don't have a great deal of control, nor does this council have a great deal of control over that, but I have made it known that I'm not all that interested in approving a site plan that has open growing marijuana in it. Am I reaching beyond the power base that we have in this municipality? Probably. If we get taken to court, whether or not that would stand up, I'm not sure. But we will, and the planning department of the town of Fort Erie will continue to use the following philosophy. We believe that if it's in the public interest, we will maintain a position on it. And that's what we'll do in this case.
Thank you. So just further, in the event that, just to reiterate for the audience members, that a site plan does come into effect or come into Town Hall for Ridge Road, an entire public consultation will take place, and that will be time for residents to voice their concerns.
Mr. Brady?
Through to the councillor. We do not have public consultation in association with site plans, period.
Okay.
However, if the council directs staff to have public consultation in conjunction with a particular site plan, that is within your purview. I think you're all aware, and I'll remind you if you're not, and that is that every time we receive a site plan, when it sort of first comes in the door, we send out a notice to each one of you saying, we've received a site plan for a little bit of what it is, so that you're aware of it. So right now, we don't have an application. If we receive an application in the next little while, or long while, or medium while, you'll all, 7 of you, will receive a notice from the planning department saying, we've received an application. I would suggest that either at that time or before that time, if you wish, you could direct staff to have a public information meeting or a public meeting. And if you wish to do that, that's fine. But if you think that will happen without you making a motion to that effect, the answer is no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I'm going to not say whether I'm going to approve this one or not, because I think it's missing a lot of information. So I don't think I'm going to support it the way it's currently written. However, I do want to bring up some issues. I understand that although there is not a site plan application, there has been a site plan initial meeting. Am I correct on that?
Has there been pre-consultation?
Yes.
Typically, we do not provide public access to pre-consultation, because pre-consultation is something which for everyone, not just like if you came in individually with the rezoning on your property and you wanted to talk to staff, you're allowed to do that confidentiality in confidence.
Again, Councillor McDermott, that's not my question. My question was there an initial site plan consultation? I'm not asking for any details.
We don't normally release that, but since you continue to ask the question, the answer is yes. But we don't normally provide that information because we want to be able to provide everyone confidentiality in terms of coming to Town Hall.
And I can appreciate that. My concern is about the changing legislation. right now, we're in the midst of the grow ops, indoors, outdoors, and the legislation keeps changing. I can remember, I think it was about a year ago, we were discussing whether we should have a storefront, or if we were going to allow storefronts here in Fort Erie or not, and it came to the question of, it doesn't really matter, because we don't have a population of 50,000. And if we don't have a population of 50,000, they're not going to be put here anyway. Well, a few weeks ago, there's legislation now on the books, I don't know how far it's gone, in that they're revisiting that. They're looking at that perhaps some of these facilities that are being grown can start selling on site. So that's a change from what it was a year ago. And perhaps my decision a year ago would be different if I knew these things are changing. And I think the legislation is constantly changing in regards to that. And in regards to the other farms and stuff, I grew up on a farm, so I know what Councillor Dubanow is talking about, but I can also recall that you can't grow cattle. I don't think that's the right word. You can't have a cattle farm or a horse farm or any other farm that has animals on it the way you did perhaps 20 years ago, because following Walkerton, they found out what happens to the groundwater with the animals doing their business. So things have changed. We don't know what's going to happen with the outside grow cannabis when it's growing outdoors. We don't know. We can't control the rain. So if we can't control the rain, we can't control the runoff that comes from the crops into the wells and into that. We don't know. We can't control it, and I don't know if there's been any studies done on when the cannabis is in a flowering stage where the odor is coming, and it's like a week from harvesting or something, and we get one of our wonderful rainstorms. What happens then to the groundwater quality? I don't know, and I don't know if anybody here knows. So I am concerned about the water quality. I'm also concerned about the odor. I know that I agree with Mr. Brady that in some of the facilities that are being built, they're built with the scrubbers, and there's no windows, and they're state of the art, and the amount of smell is minimal, if any. However, when it's an outside grow op, and I understand this, talking to the gentleman who's planning it, is that there's about 2 to 3 weeks where the smell will be significant before they harvest it. And that's just the way it is, so to speak. I'm concerned that we don't have enough information on that. I do see that in our report that it talks about other municipalities, and I know Councillor Dubanow talked about people being, municipalities being sued. I don't think anybody's being sued. I think they're being challenged in court, and I think that's a little bit different. And I wouldn't mind seeing what happens before we proceed with any, like I would like to put something in place until we see what happens in Pelham, Niagara on the Lake, and there's one, I think, by Kingston. There's several going on. So I'm thinking the other levels of government have a pretty good idea that some of the local municipalities aren't happy with their lack of control, the lack of regulation that we can put on. There's a right place and a wrong place. I don't think anybody here in the audience said that they don't want, they're against growing marijuana, because there absolutely is a use for it in regards to medicinal and everything else. But there's a right place for it, and whether it's 70 meters from somebody's backyard or whether it should be a half a mile, I mean, those are things I think we have to consider. I am going to bring another thing into this. It wasn't that long ago, probably about 8 months ago, we talked about the B&Bs and what we thought we could do and we couldn't do, what would be allowed, what wouldn't be allowed. And we were all looking at Toronto, different things. And one of the things that we talked about was that the owner had to live on site. We didn't think we didn't think that would pass in regards to legality. We didn't think we could do it. Well, guess what? Toronto won that argument. They can insist that the owner live on site. When we discussed this 8 months ago, I think it was about 8 months ago, we didn't think that we could enforce that. Well, guess what? We can. And perhaps now that we would change that. So I would suggest that we do put in an interim control bylaw, temporary freezing the land use while we review our municipal policies. And in the process, look at Pelham and look at Niagara-on-the-Lake and look at Niagara Falls and see where they're going, what their argument is, and also try to get more information on how this is going to affect the local residents. So I don't know if this is, I know this is somewhat referred to in the, I'm just pulling this up again. On page 5 of 15 here, we talk about a number of municipalities, including Niagara-on-the-Lake, Pelham, and Niagara Falls, have passed interim control bylaws that prohibit the establishment of any cannabis production facilities in the municipality or in certain areas of the municipality, for example, agricultural lands, while they study the issue. And I think that's what we need to do here. I think we need to study the issue. I don't think that we should be allowing, this refers to, this again refers to cannabis facilities. And another place is one of the suggestions is that cannabis facilities be zoned an industry and therefore can only be done in industrial lands. Again, there's a number of other studies there and suggestions that we can do, and I think we need to look at this closely. And for that, I would like to see us put an interim control bylaw, temporary freezing the land use until we come up with our policies in regards to this. And I'm not quite sure how I go about it. That's a...
If you're looking for some advice, perhaps you need to set your mind to whether or not you want to have the interim control bylaw apply to all future facilities, because an interim control bylaw cannot apply to open growing, because that's agriculture. And you can't have an interim control bylaw that says you can't plant corn, nor can you have one that says you can't plant marijuana. But you can ask for an interim control bylaw that says that all facilities will not be able to be put in place for a year. And if the council decides that they want to pass that, then they would need to immediately turn their mind to a budget for a study, which staff would bring back a report on that, because the requirements of an interim control bylaw is that a study be done as a result of passing that bylaw. So if you're looking for advice, I would suggest that you would want to say the interim control bylaw is to prevent all forms of marijuana facilities for a year.
Hearing that, I would probably be in favor of that, but is there nothing that we can do to control in regards to the agricultural, the outside grow, in regards to how close they can be to other neighboring properties? I know that we have controls about light. I know we have controls about, I guess that the federal government has a control about the height of the fences and things like that. But we can control the number of chickens somebody has in their backyard if it's a residential property. I mean, we control so many things. Are you telling us that we can't control something that's going to perhaps have adverse effects on the residents that are surrounding that we have no, because it's grown outside?
Should I deal with that, Chairman? Yes. If you look to Appendix 2 of the report that's before you, it identifies a report of the Normal Farm Practices Protection Board. So this is a township up near Ottawa, the township of Beckwith, which attempted to do just what you're suggesting. It attempted to put setback requirements for the outdoor growing of marijuana. The province of Ontario stepped in, and they have now had 3 hearings before this protection board, and all of which is the province of Ontario telling them, you can't do this. And this is dated this year, 2019.
If I can, Councillor McDermott, further that I actually did read that, and actually I thought that that decision hasn't been rendered yet, because on the findings that the board therefore finds that until such time as a full hearing is held and the farm practices for the proposed operation are determined, the doctrine of paramountcy test cannot be applied. So I'm not sure whether that case has been settled yet, and whether the province is right, or whether the municipality is going to win. Are you sure that this case has been settled?
The case has not been settled, but if you continue with the paragraph that you were reading, the board would have to consider that doctrine and could not find that conducting that farm practice only during daylight hours was of normal practice. To do so would be in direct conflict with federal legislation. That has been found.
Yes, I understand that, but I don't think we care whether the marijuana is being grown in the daylight or the nighttime. I'm just thinking is that there's still the purpose of putting that timeline on, or the daylight, whatever, or can only grow it in the dark, is really wasn't the point. I think the point was can they, as a municipality, put controls in place, and I don't think that decision's been reached.
I can only provide you advice. It's up to you to make decisions, but my final advice on this is I have never, in my almost 40 years of practice, seen an interim control bylaw that tries to control crops that are open grown. It would be the first, I'm sure, and if that is the case, I'm not even certain how we would study that. So make it clear, council is going to have to give staff very specific direction. Is the interim control bylaw for production facilities, or is the interim control bylaw for production facilities plus the open growing of marijuana? And if it is, that's up to you to determine, but that will also set forth how the challenge will occur.
If I can continue, again, I have more concern over the open grow than I do the facilities, because I think a new facility that can control the smell, the sound, the lighting, and everything else. I have more concern about the open grow and the effects it has on the neighborhood and the water table and all the other things that are going on that it could possibly do. So, and I'm not sure, because I'm wondering what is Niagara Falls and Pelham and that doing? They're not just going after facilities, are they? Are they not also looking at Niagara Lake? Is it not looking at land use, like, so that they are also controlling open grows?
I'm not precisely sure, but I don't believe that they're trying to control that. I believe they're trying to control facilities. And as I said, it's up to council if council wishes to try to control both. But the controlling of facilities, as I've said earlier, when it comes to site plans, if an operation is going to come in and is going to go through a site plan process, which means it's not an open grow operation, then I believe we have the control mechanisms in place now to deal with them. But when it comes to open growing, I'm at a loss. I mean, right now we have 300 plants being grown in somebody's backyard on the Parkway. We've sent the police there. My bylaw enforcement people have been there, and they've been told you can do nothing.
And I can appreciate that our hands may be tied on this, but I think we have to try. I am looking at the Niagara on the Lake bylaw here, and it says it was done August 27, 2018. It says the council initiated a review of its land use planning policies pertaining to all cannabis-related land use, and that the interim control bylaw, and won't give the number, be passed to restrict the use of all lands in the municipality for any cannabis-related land uses for a period of 1 year pending the completion of the review. So I'm thinking they're not just looking at facilities. I think they're looking at land use. Again, I don't know where this is. This was done in 2018, August 27th. So I don't know how far it's gone down and whether any decisions have been made. But there are other municipalities doing this, looking at controlling land use. So I would hope that we can also do that. So I would think that I would like to say that we put a freeze on this, an interim control bylaw, a temporary freeze on lands for all cannabis-related uses until we have our policies in place, and we review our policies.
You said for all cannabis?
For all cannabis-related land use. I like what Niagara on the Lake has done. See where that's going. But again, I'm more concerned about the open grow than I am about the particular facility itself. Again, I just wanted to say this is just to initiate a review of the land use, to find out what we can and can't do, and that we put a freeze on until we put our planning policies in place.
Thank you.
That's all.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yes, just a couple questions here. In the report, on page 2 of 8, under background, now it says in 2013, we, staff brought forward an amendment to the official plan in the zoning bylaw. And these amendments were designed to ensure that the town was prepared for applications as a result of the 2013 marijuana for medical purposes regulations, which changed the face of the production of medical marijuana by allowing larger production, processing, and distribution of marijuana for medical purposes. So, in 2013, the amendments were made to our official plan and our zoning bylaw for medical marijuana. And then on page 3, the town's official plan and zoning bylaw have not been updated in response to access to cannabis for medical purposes regulation or the Cannabis Act, which are the two current pieces of legislation, right, governing the production of cannabis. Now, my question is, what's the difference between medical marijuana or the 2013 marijuana for medical purposes regulation and access to cannabis for medical purposes regulations? Is that two separate regulation, and is one defunct now, and now we're dealing with the newer one?
Mr. Brady?
There have been changes to the federal legislation, and the current federal legislation is access to cannabis for medical purposes regulations or the Cannabis Act. So those are the two current pieces of legislation governing cannabis in Canada. And they've replaced, as it says in the same paragraph, the medical marijuana purposes. Yep.
Okay, so.
And this report asks council to authorize staff to initiate amendments to update that.
Yeah, so the amendments that we made in 2013, I would assume they don't apply because that act is no longer in effect. Is that correct?
That's incorrect. No, it's incorrect. What we put in place in the official plan and zoning bylaw continue to be in place because they were approved and continue to be in place. What they aren't is they're not completely consistent with the new legislation. And this report suggests that council authorize staff to bring the official plan and zoning bylaw into conformity with the new legislation.
Okay, so our official plan and our bylaw, we're going to, let's just say for all intents and purposes, we approve this tonight, that we're going to update it to comply with the access to cannabis for medical purposes regulations. But the Cannabis Act is a different animal, so we need policies and we need bylaws for that as well. That's going to be, they're going to be different. Is that correct?
We will look at both of those pieces of legislation. Medical purposes regulations are regulations, and the Cannabis Act, which is legislation. And we will take both of those into consideration in terms of bringing forth policies that are appropriate.
Okay, so it looks like we're moving forward with some kind of policies that are going to regulate. And on page 4, going back to the Normal Farm Practices Board, Protection Board, and that is the one that's on Appendix 2. The ruling in that their case is it was unclear as to whether it is lawful to use municipal bylaws and on for marijuana growing. But when I read Appendix 2, there was the hearing that was in front of the panel. There were 3 things that needed to be 3 issues that were in front of the board. But they decided that they weren't going to deal with issues 1 and issues 2, and they only dealt with issue 3. And at the end of the day, issue 3 said, we can't make a ruling because we have to have a full hearing. My understanding to what I read here is too many unanswered questions. We need some answers. And that was from the farming board. They need answers. I think we need the same answers. I think we need an interim bylaw. All this needs to be determined. Mr. Chair, if this council remembers correctly, when this came to council a while back, I said the same thing. There's too many unanswered questions about this marijuana. I criticized the federal government for passing legalizing marijuana because I said that the federal government hasn't thought this over enough. They haven't put the right rules and regulations. They haven't consulted municipalities like us. They just throw it out there. They said, okay, it's a free-for-all. Go for it. Have fun. Do whatever you want, right? And now we want to put some regulations in place. We're not restricting. We're not telling you you can't do it. We just need to regulate it, just like we regulated the short-term rentals, right? Just need a few regulations. But we're not getting any help from the federal government that says, well, yeah, okay, you can have that law and you can have that law. No. Let's put an interim bylaw in place for a year. Let's get the answers. Let's develop some policies so that everything is regulated. If there's something, a problem with light that they're worried about the light shining on their properties. We have a policy in place. That light needs to be restricted to this or that. The odor, you have to have proper ventilation. You have to have proper air circulation. It has to change every so many minutes or every hour or whatever it is. Those are the types of policies that we need in place. You can grow as long as you meet these policies. And the interim bylaw is only for 1 year. And it not only protects the people in this town, it's also going to protect the guy that's going to be growing. So I agree with Councillor Noyes. I think we should put together an interim control bylaw. Let's review this. Let's get some studies done. Please, folks, look, we can't be doing that, all right? I understand what you're saying, but we don't need applause and everything. You can pat me on the back on the way out. But anyway, Mr. Chair, let's get this done right. Interim control bylaw is the way to go, right? And don't go by the report saying that, oh, this guy went to court and that guy went to court. Well, there's no ruling yet. So we're not doing anything illegal. But the report certainly makes it sound like if you do, you're going to be doing something illegal. And I don't think that that's fair, that this report reflects that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Councillor Noyes?
Just wanted to comment that if we do put an interim control bylaw in place for a year, I'm thinking a lot of those decisions that are before the courts will have been made, and we'll have a much better idea what we can and can't do. But if we give people permission now, if we don't put any interim controls in, or look at our policies right now, and people get the green light to go ahead and do it, you can't do it after the fact. I think you have to do it now. But I think the interim, the 1 year, will give us a chance to look at how this is going through the courts and which way the judges are deciding.
Okay. Are there any further comments?
Just one, thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Clerk, just for some clarification, how do we go about putting together an interim control bylaw? Is that would be due by notice of motion, or can we do that tonight? Make a motion to do that? How would that work?
The clerk has asked me to deal with it. You can make a motion tonight, if you will, that the council wants an interim control bylaw to be prepared. It will then be prepared and will be brought back to you as a bylaw that you will then approve. So if the majority of council approve that, then one will be brought back at a later date.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would leave that for Councillor Noyes. I would support it if you want to bring it forward, Councillor Noyes.
I do want to, I think I mentioned that earlier, that I would like to have an interim control bylaw in regards to temporary putting a freeze on land use while the municipality reviews its policies. I think that covers it, doesn't it, Mr. Brady?
I think it's important that you add in that buildings and facilities and land use, if that's what you wish.
Buildings, facilities, and land use.
Councillor Zanko?
Just for clarification, are we voting on this report that's currently on the floor first, or is Councillor Noyes bringing this up under new business, this motion? Or
To be able to move forward, because the report is before you, you would have to turn down this report, because this report says specifically that the council received the information in this report regarding the use of interim control bylaws in residential areas and further, et cetera. So you would turn down this report, and then, if you wished, you would then put in this, an alternative motion that the interim control bylaw be dealt with.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm kind of confused here because we're just receiving it for information. The report is only for information, so we can still approve the report and receive it, but we can put together, and I think Councillor Noyes can put together a motion that we, her motion outside of this report. I don't have a problem with receiving it for information. Basically, that's all we're doing. The only
No,
thing
that's
is
not,
to
that's
second
not.
that.
Okay. That's not what you're doing. It says to receive it for information, and then it goes on to say, staff be authorized to initiate the amendments. So what it implies is that there will not be an interim control bylaw, but rather there will be an initiation of amendments to the official plan and the comprehensive zoning bylaw. If you wish to have an interim control bylaw, you won't be initiating amendments to the official plan and the comprehensive zoning bylaw.
Yes,
You'll
I
be putting in an
understand.
interim control bylaw, and then, as a result of a year-long study, there may or may not be amendments to the official plan.
Yes, I understand that, Mr. Brady. So I would think that we could eliminate the second that. We could still can maintain the first that we've received a report, and eliminate the second that and replace it with that staff be directed to that to council puts in a interim bylaw, and we come forward with Councilor Noyes' motion.
My understanding is this report is on the floor, and it was put on the floor. So if there are any amendments to the resolutions, those should be put forward, and those should be dealt with first before the report.
Oh, Mr. Chair, I need some clarification from the clerk then.
Madam Clerk?
If we,
Madam Clerk? Keep it going this way. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I believe that Mr. Brady is correct. If the main recommendation in the report is being, if an amendment is suggested, then the amendment does get dealt with first, but this seems like it's a completely new recommendation, so therefore the report is on the floor and that recommendation must be dealt with first, because it's, Councillor Noyes' is a completely different recommendation. It's not amending the main recommendation.
Okay, so if we're done with this recommendation here, all in favor? Opposed? And in favor. This one.
well, then that carried. No interim control bylaw.
Point of order, I'm just wondering, who's the chair of this business subdivision?
I am.
Councillor McDermott, would now be the time that we would then put my request for an interim control bylaw? Okay, I'm going to,
I think the proper procedure would be, you'd have to bring a notice of motion with respect to this, and you can do that at Monday's council meeting.
I'm not here on
This is,
Monday.
well, somebody can bring it, or you can give notice of the motion, but this report, since it's been carried, you'd have to bring up a new motion.
Okay, so, but I can't do it tonight unless we waive the rules of procedure?
You'd waive the rules, yeah.
Okay, I ask, can I make a motion that we waive the rules of procedure so that I can put a notice of motion on tonight in regard to the interim control bylaw?
Opposed?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to put a notice of motion that the municipality look into putting in an interim control bylaw to review the study. How did I put it before? I've said it so many times. That we put an interim control bylaw to temporarily put a freeze on land uses, some land uses within the municipality in regards to cannabis production and grow.
Returnable.
Returnable in,
January 20th is the next regular council meeting after December 9th.
okay, on January 20th.
Councillor Zanko?
And just wanted to clarify, that report would be specific for information purposes, and then we would be deciding once we receive that information. Is that correct, Councillor?
Yes,
Okay,
that's correct.
thank you.
So, yeah, all in favor? Carried. That was the notice of motion.
No,
Okay. I give the chair back to Councillor Noyes.
I'm the right page now. Okay, thank you, Councilor McDermott, for taking the chair for me. That brings us to report number PDS 73, 2019, extension of draft plan approval, Alliston Woods subdivision, north of Garrison Road, east of Spears Road.
so moved.
That report is now on the floor for comments and questions. Councillor Lubberts. Councillor, have like a 2-minute break for those people who'd like to leave.
Yeah, all right, yeah, that's fine, yeah, I need a couple minutes to find my,
How about, can we have a 5-minute?
yeah, okay, yeah.
Okay, we're now back in session. I think Councillor Lubberts isn't here, though. Yes, I think someone's going to go get him, because I know that he was interested in the Ellison Woods, so I don't want to.
Well, then he should be here.
I'll move that.
Okay, the report is now on the floor. Councillor Lubberts, the report for the Ellison Woods subdivision extension of draft plan approval is now on the floor. Anyone have any comments or questions?
Yes.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just looking for Appendix 2 here. Yes, thank you. In the request for the extension, there's some talk about acquisition of the land. And exactly what piece of land are they acquiring? And where does it say who is responsible for acquiring that land?
Mr. Brady?
If you look at Appendix 2 report, you'll see a road, Street A, which then moves out and it ends at the property line. That road needs to be extended through to Craft.
Councillor Lubberts?
And is that all of Favreau's property?
No, the lands which are closest to Garrison have been acquired by the developer. The property that Mr. Favreau, I believe it's his daughter, owns is the lands which are between there and the road.
Okay. So now, my next question, I don't understand how the region was asked to comment when they were going through the secondary plan for Spears High Point secondary plan. So they commented that the best way to get access to this subdivision is through extending Craft Road. And it was just their opinion, a comment. How does it all of a sudden now become a binding part of our official plan and become binding to the secondary plan? How does that happen without everybody knowing that?
Mr. Brady?
Through the secondary planning process, we've gone through many. We have many public meetings, many neighborhood meetings, as there was for this particular secondary plan. All of the neighbors, including Mr. Favreau, were certainly notified. And through that process, this council implemented an official plan amendment which identified that there will be a road that comes from Garrison up and through and into this subdivision. So the secondary plan identified that, and the comment was quite correct, as Mr. Muratori made, that it came from the region. I will add that that emanated because of the massive amount of public that came out that said, please don't dump all these roads out onto Spears Road. And so that as a result of that, those public meetings that we had in association with that, an alternative location needed to be identified. However, the secondary plan was approved by this council and implemented. Furthermore, a draft plan of subdivision condition specifically identified that, and that was approved by this council as well. So there are two binding pieces of information that say that there will be a linkage through in this location. One is the secondary plan, which was approved by council, and the second is the draft plan of subdivision, which was also approved by council.
Anything further?
Okay,
Councillor
thank you.
Lubberts?
So that's how it was, that's how it's laid out now. It's in the secondary plan. Who's responsible for acquiring that land? Is it the developer? Is that up to him? Or is it the town of Fort Erie?
Mr. Brady?
It's the developer's responsibility. So if you look on page Appendix 5, Condition 55, move through to Condition 55.
5?
Condition 5.5 of the draft plan of subdivision.
Yeah.
Says that the developer acknowledges and agrees, so the developer acknowledged and agreed to prepare a plan and profile drawing of the future extension of Craft Road North, Street A, to be reviewed and approved by the Niagara Region prior to committee applying for the construction encroachment permit to beginning of construction. So clearly, it was outlined at the time, the developer knew that it was outlined at the time, and acknowledged it and agreed to it.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Where in it, where does it acknowledge that Mr. Favreau understands all this?
There's nothing in the reports that says Mr. Favreau does or does not.
So the guy that's losing his land doesn't know nothing.
Councillor Lubberts, I don't think that's, I think.
Point of order, Madam Chair. That's not even a fair comment. He's not losing his land. He can sell it if he wishes, and if he doesn't, we've been told by the delegate, they'll buy some other land. Or, I suppose there's always the ultimate expropriation, but he's not losing his land.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So that brings me to my next question is the delegate that was here earlier,
Still here.
he spoke that they're looking at alternate access. Well, then that tells me that what's in the official plan isn't set in stone. Just because it's in this official plan doesn't mean that that has to happen, because if you're looking for alternatives.
Mr. Brady, are there possible alternatives to this number 55?
If it depends what you're talking about as an alternative in this case. The official plan is clear. There will be a road across the street from Craft, and it will eventually connect into this subdivision. Whether it goes directly, straight line, or whether it's on a bit of a curve, that's a possibility.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. There's a map in here with showed the streets.
6.
I think there was Alliston Road. At the end of the subdivision, is there a road allowance there that's called Alliston Road?
Mr. Brady?
If you look on Appendix 4, there's a location plan that identifies the land to be acquired, and on it you'll also see where the Alliston Avenue untraveled road allowance is.
Yeah.
The question that I'm expecting is, why didn't we use that? It was looked at, and it was determined that it was unsuitable, and that it would put a great deal of traffic onto Spears Road, which is what we were trying to avoid.
Councillor Lubberts?
Well, Alliston Avenue, that goes on to Garrison Road, don't know.
Brady?
Am I
Yes.
looking at it wrong?
Yes, it does, but also there would be multiple connections to Spears Road. All this was reviewed with the developer at the time this plan of subdivision was put in place, and it was agreed upon that the Alliston Avenue would not be used.
But the
Traffic
subdivision
studies
butts
done.
up against Alliston Avenue, right?
Yeah, there were traffic studies completed and identified that this was the appropriate way to go. If you wanted to use Allison, you would need to completely redesign this subdivision because it's not designed in a fashion to do that. And I don't believe you would have a desirable traffic outcome long-term.
Councillor Lubberts?
Yeah, I see that. But on the onset, I would think that they could have used Alliston, but that's all the questions I have. I think I
Any further
got
comments
my
or
point
questions?
across.
Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up that last part. I mean, there's subdivision on either side of Alliston Avenue. So that isn't going to be a road?
Brady?
No, it's not. It will be developed as shown on Appendix 2. It will come down, and Alliston will not continue through to connect to Garrison. In fact, there'll be a park in that location. The intent of this whole plan is to try to ensure that we have a signalized intersection that works on Craft, that then funnels the traffic up through into this subdivision and into the other subdivisions that are to the west of here. So we were attempting to ensure that there would be a good traffic circulation, and in fact, the long-term goal is to have a bus route that would go down this road and out and through into this subdivision as well. So we're trying to do an integrated approach to the overall manner, and we thought we'd had that. But the stumbling block continues to be the one property. And as I said before, there is an alternative, and I'm still hopeful that the offer that the offer that will be made by Mr. Silvestri will be sufficient so that Mr. Favreau will say yes, and then all of this will be moot.
Okay, well, I'm not holding out any great hope for that, but I see how the Craft Road intersection could be accomplished by simply going around the yellow parcel on Appendix 4. However, just for clarification then, Alliston Avenue is going to be open for much of the subdivision, but it's not going to enter onto Garrison Road.
That is correct.
And so in the future, because that is a road allowance, and I don't think it's been given up, I don't believe it's been closed, has it? Would you know?
It is a road allowance. It has not been given up, and it will be used as a road which will be built as a part of this subdivision.
Right, but not connecting to Garrison Road.
That's correct.
However, in the future, if it turns out that the number of residents living in this area, based on the 170 new units that will be constructed, that could be a possible further outlet. Is that correct? Maybe, I know it's not on your plan right now, but that could be a potential future outlet.
The traffic analysis that was done for the subdivision and the traffic analysis that was done for the secondary plan have identified that if we can secure the Craft Road entrance, there will be no need for the other one.
Right, my supposition was that if it turns out in the future there is a need, we've got a further outlet that's possible.
If the town of Fort Erie wants to build an additional road, certainly.
Well, there's already part of a road there because of the pumping station. So anyways, that's fine. I'm going to support this. I mean, this seems pretty basic. If the developer can get the land from, it's designated as yellow, he'll get it, and if not, he'll do something else, and we'll still have an intersection and it'll still be a functional subdivision, so I'm gonna support this.
Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Getting back to Alliston, what was the rationale behind saying that if you used Alliston Road for the access, why would that create too much traffic on Spears Road?
Mr. Brady?
What would end up is that you would end up with Spears Road, which is already having a capacity issue, so the traffic report identified. Alliston Road would be put in. Roughly half of the people leaving the subdivision would go east and half of the people would go west. I'm not a traffic engineer, but go with me generally speaking. And that would create problems, continuing problems for Spears Road. If you had the middle access point, it's expected that more of the traffic would be accessed through there.
Councillor Lubberts?
So the way that it's laid out right now, Craft Road is gonna go right straight through the whole subdivision?
Correct.
Okay, just one more question.
Okay, Councillor Lubberts?
This draft plan that we have here, is that the original plan of subdivision? This subdivision has changed several times, am I correct?
Different than what I can recall about 20 years ago. Mr.
There was
Brady?
a very old draft plan of subdivision on this property, and I believe it was registered. It made no sense. No one wanted to build it. I'm not even sure why it was ever registered. It couldn't be serviced in the old days because there was no pumping station put in place. When that pumping station was put in place, then there was the opportunity for servicing to actually move into this area, and there was a significant revision to the draft plan of subdivision. It's been revised a couple of times since then.
Councillor Lubberts?
So it's, yeah, because I think it was the first term of my council. My term on council, my first term, that we did some red line revisions, and there was something about, there was some wetlands on the north part, and we made a mistake, and we gave approval that they could build on even in the wetlands. So the developer came back and said, well, we can build there now, so they changed the whole subdivision to accommodate more units. Am I correct, Mr. Brady?
Brady?
I'm not sure exactly when you were first elected, sir, but
2010.
if you look on page 2, you'll see the Allison Woods subdivision was originally draft approved by Town Council in January 29th, 2001.
Yeah. Yeah, no, but this one
And
came
then an
forward
application for
when
red line came back. Yes.
my first term of council was when they brought the letter and showed that we had made a mistake as a municipality and gave them approval to build in the wetlands. So they came back in between 2010 and 2014 and said, well, you made the mistake, we can build in there. So they changed this plan of subdivision to accommodate more houses. I'm pretty sure that that's what happened. So,
Okay.
Madam Chair, the point I'm trying to make, this subdivision has changed numerous times, right? And I'm sure the configuration has changed. And now we're saying we can't change the configuration unless we got to use it like Craft Road. We cannot change the configuration. I can't see that. Now, I don't have a problem with approving the extension of the draft plan of subdivision, because the draft plan of subdivision I don't have a problem with, right? But I'm hoping that, Mr. Favreau and the developer can get together, or the developer can come and take a look at Alliston again and do another traffic study and see maybe it's viable now. But I'm not going to have a problem with the extension.
Okay, so any other comments or questions? So the report's on the floor. All those in favor? The report carries. That brings us to new business inquiries. That brings us, seeing none, that brings us to business status report. Being none, Planning and Development Services is now closed, and I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. That takes us into infrastructure services. Councillor Lubberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We have no presentations or delegations. And that brings us to our first report, IS 44-2019, update on the implementation of 2019 operational changes at Bay Beach.
So moved.
Mayor Redekop, thank you. That report's on the floor. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councillor Lubberts. I reviewing this report, and I am in favor of the recommendations in it. I think it was a learning curve for us, but I do think that we got most of it right. And I think now we're showing some flexibility in regards to some seasonal residents, and I think also the Airbnbs. So not like the $100 for a non-resident seasonal admission and things like that. So my question goes around that $100 for a non-resident seasonal admission pass for Bay Beach. Did that 10 times fast. Is that transferable?
I don't believe so, no. That's for one person. But Mr. Walsh, are you still here?
And awake.
All right.
Councillor Noyes, can you repeat the question, please?
I thought you were
Might
awake.
be awake,
Long
but you're not
Johns for tomorrow.
listening. Okay, there's a thing here that there are $100 for a non-resident seasonal admission pass for Bay Beach, and I'm making an assumption there that $100. My question is that transferable? In other words, if someone like an Airbnb bought 4 of them, they could then give them to the people who are renting them at the time, or is it not transferable?
No, your former statement is correct. That they are transferable, and they are targeted at short-term rentals.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Mr. Walsh, can you just explain how that would work? Just so everybody understands that if you bought one for $100, then they can transfer it to, how would that all work?
So essentially, there's 2 ways to purchase it as we foresee right now. That may change in the future, but one is through our usual season pass sales program, but another is through our short-term rental application in the building department. We believe there'll be a checkbox on their annual application as to how many passes they would like to buy, and then they become registered to the owner of the property. After that, it's up to the owner to divvy them out as he or she sees fit.
Okay, okay, thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Yeah, I'd like to ask, just on, maybe I should turn the chair over to Councillor Zanko while if you'll, yeah, thank you.
Yes, sure, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank staff. There was a lot of people that I talked to over the summer, and even I'm still talking to now, and they were very impressed with the fact that the general public and the residents were involved and over the summer with the surveys and all the other stuff, and it gave them all an opportunity to speak up and have some input. So they were all very happy, and I want to thank staff for that. But looking at the numbers, and I'm not going to dispute the numbers that we collected, but just for the people that are listening, we total revenues collected with the beach, $428,363. Now, my question to Mr. Walsh is the expenses, and there's one in particular, is the first expense, which talks about additional maintenance, and then the second one, it talks about park maintenance. So there was 2 maintenance charges. And I'm wondering why are you charging against the revenue collected? 2 maintenance fees?
Mr. Walsh?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm, Councillor Lubberts, I'm not sure which 2 fees or which 2 items you're referring to. I see.
Well, the first one
was one was 104,000, the other was 35,000.
104. Oh no, that's the proposed 2020 proposed. No, the actual. Oh, 104. The 2019 104 actual. Yeah. So it says that was, and then that says that it was building maintenance, park maintenance, right?
Correct.
And
others.
And then the 2 above that, it says supervisor admissions, staff, additional maintenance staff. Oh, all right, okay, so there's 2 different, that was for staff. But the question that I have on the $104,000, right, was the park maintenance. Now, it's my understanding, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, when we collect our development charges are collected, and that money goes towards parks and facilities. Am I correct?
Some does, I believe.
So why is it that we're charging against the admission fees for something that we should be taking out of development charges?
I think.
I don't know who wants to answer that question.
No.
Jonathan?
No, I've got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay.
Yeah. These are annual and ongoing charges, such as the supply of toilet paper and water and lawn mowing and garden tools, etc. Those are not DC eligible charges. DC charges primarily go to capital costs. So the one-time construction costs. These are annual and ongoing.
Yeah, but do we do the same thing for all our other parks? Where does that money come out of?
We track all the money that we spend on parks. You'll see in January, and we can talk about it at our business subcommittee further, what the costs are for active and passive parks and other beaches.
Yeah, but here we're combining the beach and the park together, right?
Just the Bay Beach facility. There's the beach section and the park section upland of it. But it's all included as one.
Yeah.
For purposes of illustration here.
Okay, all right. Okay. I'm good. Well, anyway, thank you. And I'm happy to see these results, and hopefully next year we'll have a better year. Thank you.
Are there any other questions with regard to the report? Seeing none. Oh, Mr. Walsh, you had further comment?
I would like to make a comment to council and anybody that's listening out there. I'd just like to give kudos to the rest of the IS staff and planning and development Services staff that were involved in the Bay Beach operations over the past year. It was a new adventure for us. As Councillor Noyes stated succinctly, I think we got most of it right, and that goes to the credit and hard work of the staff out there and their dedication to this project.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. I will call the question. All those in favor? That report passes. Councillor Lubberts, did you want the chair back, or did you want me just to continue? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and just through you to Mr. Walsh, I just want to extend my most sincere appreciation for all the work that his staff did leading up to the second windstorm as well as the first. I know that we had some crews out there replacing flap gates the very morning that the wind was supposed to happen. That appreciation and that dedication is not unnoticed by the residents in the area. It's not unnoticed by myself, and I really appreciate everything that you guys did. There's some very happy people in that neighborhood when that flap gate was replaced that morning. I just wanted to say it publicly here on the record because it's very much appreciated, and also to the mayor as well. It was quite the issue going back and forth, but I think we got it resolved. And from what I understand, there was only a little bit of water in one of the basements instead of a full blown flood. So it's very much appreciated, Mr. Walsh. Thank you.
Mr. Walsh, you want to comment?
Yeah, I would. Thank you. We appreciate your comments, Councillor. It seems like we're running into these storms more often now. There's a number of areas in town that are affected to a greater degree, it seems. So as council will remember from our asset management plan submitted earlier this year, through the legislation, we're required to consider climate change in everything we do now. So you'll expect to see maybe some increased costs, maybe some innovative engineering to positively affect what we do out there.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any other inquiries? Seeing none, we'll move to the business status report. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, infrastructure services now in recess. I'll turn the chair over to Mayor Redekop.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lubberts. Are there any scheduling of meetings? Councillor Zanko and then Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Your Worship. We have a Fort Erie Active Transportation Committee meeting being held here tomorrow, which is December 3rd at 5:30 p.m.
Councillor Noyes.
I think the Accessibility Committee is going to be joining you tomorrow. I think our meeting starts at 4:30. I think there's a dinner. Our Christmas get-together is tomorrow. We're meeting at 4:30. And
any other meetings? If none, then Councillor Dubanow, are you still up to a motion to adjourn?
I would be pleased to put a motion to adjourn on the floor, Your Worship.
All those in favor? Opposed? Indifferent? Carried. So